Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to be reconvening the council. Right before we get into our next agenda item, I did want to pick up something that Chris had mentioned earlier this morning. That is that we have not exactly a new face around the table, a very familiar face that is new to being back at the table. And that's Lori Nolan, was appointed to the council on an off-cycle appointment. So Lori, we're happy to have you back and appreciate your adding your expertise and knowledge once again to the council table. As we pointed out at that earlier agenda item, Lori is although sitting, has not had a chance to be sworn in, which will happen in December. So for now, when we look to Lori, we'll look to her hand in the public comment section until she is sworn in at our next meeting. So thank you, Lori. Welcome. And with that, we'll move into our first afternoon council agenda item, which is recreational tilefish permitting and the reporting framework. And I think Hannah's going to start us off.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a framework meeting one specifically for the recreational tilefish reporting framework. And just to set the stage, we are only talking about the private recreational reporting for this framework action. So for the outline for today's presentation, first I'll go over some background on the private recreational permitting and reporting requirements, and then from there speak to the overall performance of the program. After that, we'll get into a brief overview of the 2024 program evaluation. This will just include some of the key findings related to that framework, since a more in-depth summary of that project was presented to the council last October. Then from there, we'll get into the framework draft range of alternatives and some next steps. And the primary goal of today is to approve a range of alternatives for further analysis and development. For a little background, in 2016, the council adopted Amendment 6 to the Tilefish FMP. This amendment was a rather large one, since it added blue line tilefish to the plan and established management measures for that species. However, through this amendment, the council also recommended implementing private recreational permit and reporting requirements for both blue line and golden tilefish. A little over a year later, in 2017, Amendment 6 was approved by NMFS. However, in the final rule, it highlighted that implementation of the private recreational permitting and reporting requirements would be delayed to allow for more time to set up the system needed for implementation. Then later in August of 2020, the requirements were implemented, and since then, the council has had annual updates provided by GARFO on the trends of the number of permits and trips reported each year. During final action of that amendment, as well as the environmental assessment drafted for that amendment, it was highlighted that a dedicated private recreational permit and reporting program for tilefish was needed to support effective conservation and management of these two species. As many of you know, this fishery occurs far offshore, and in comparison to some of our other managed species, relatively few anglers target tilefish, and therefore few tilefish anglers are intercepted through MRIP. So given the low intercept rates, MRIP tilefish estimates include very high % standard errors associated with them, often greater than 80%, and that's for both of our tilefish species. And because of this, the rationale for these requirements was to collect reliable catch and effort data, which was and remains a key data gap for both tilefish species. So the current requirements include a free vessel-based permit that is mandatory on any vessel intending to fish for golden or blue line tilefish in federal waters in the Mid-Atlantic region. And then reporting requirements require operators of those vessels to submit an electronic vessel trip report, or an EVTR, for any trip targeting tilefish, even if no tilefish are caught. There are a number of electronic reporting platforms that these vessel operators can use, and trip reports must be submitted within 24 hours after the fishing trip has ended. And on the right-hand side here, this is the list of information that is currently required to report. And I just wanted to highlight that in part because of these regulations were implemented on a delayed timeline, as well as this being the first example of private recreational mandatory reporting for any of our managed species. There wasn't a lot of input on what these required fields should be, and the current required information really came primarily from what is required for hire vessels. I would also like to note that for the permanent reporting requirements, there were some differences between what the council recommended during final action through Amendment 6 compared to what was later implemented by GARFO in 2020. For example, the council had recommended that the EBTRs for private recreational anglers be submitted once returning to port before any tilefish were removed from the vessel, while the final rule implemented that they be submitted within 24 hours, which was similar to the HMS angling reporting requirements for example, bluefin tuna. Additionally, the council had recommended that EBTRs be submitted for any trip where tilefish were caught, but the final rule required EBTRs be submitted for any trip where tilefish were targeted. So that includes on trips where no tilefish are landed or caught. Since implementation of these regulations, as I noted earlier, the council has reviewed the number of permits and reported tilefish trips on an annual basis, which from year to year show low reporting rates and this mismatch between the number of permits that are issued annually compared to the total number of reported tilefish trips. Looking at the most recent full year data, so 2024 as well as 2025 data through September, you'll notice that we continue to see an increase in the number of permits issued, as well as the proportion of permits renewed, as indicated by the gray bar in that graph on the left. But if we look at the number of reported trips, although we are seeing a slight increasing trend in total trips that are reporting tilefish, which is shown in the pink bars in the graph on the right, the percentage of permits reporting has been low and stable across the entire time series between about 2 and 4%. And for example, in 2025, as of September, there were 1,400 permits issued, but only 65 of those permits reported catching tilefish, and only 122 trips catching tilefish were reported. Additionally, you'll notice in the graph on the right that each year there is also reported private recreational trips with no tilefish catch, but catching other species, as well as some trips reported that have no catch at all. And it's important to note here that given the way the data is provided, it's not currently possible to decipher if those trips that don't catch tilefish are targeting tilefish or if they're targeting other species. And then when we compare the landings of both blue line and golden reported through the EBTRs as shown in the rightmost column and the two tables in these slides compared to other private recreational landing estimates available through MRIP as well as the Large Pelagic Survey or LPS. Although recognizing that there are notable challenges associated with both MRIP and LPS tilefish estimates, despite these limitations, both MRIP and LPS produce catch estimates that are significantly higher than landings reported through the EBTRs, further highlighting the shortcomings of the current reporting system and the importance of identifying more reliable catch estimates for these two species. So to better understand why tilefish reporting rates are so low, council staff worked with a few contractors in 2024 on 2 tilefish projects. The first project was a targeted outreach campaign to try and increase awareness of these requirements. And the second project was a program evaluation. And as I mentioned, the council received a presentation on this effort and outcomes last October. And this work, as well as council deliberation during that meeting, really helped pave the way for the framework action we're discussing today. So just to quickly highlight the outreach campaign, we specifically targeted different meetings and opportunities to reach out to the offshore angling community, especially those that fish for tilefish. This slide lists the major tasks accomplished during that effort, as well as a few photos showing the contractors engaging with the angling community. If you think back a few slides ago where I showed the 2 bar graphs that broke down the number of permits and trips reported each year, in 2024, you may have noticed that there was a a much larger increase in the number of permits as well as trips reported compared to previous years. And we're hopeful that that was in part at least attributed to this effort. So getting out there and speaking with the angling community to let them know about the regulations. So then the second project was the program evaluation. During this project, a series of focus group discussions were held in areas where we know anglers target tilefish. The objectives of this evaluation was to better understand why each year the reporting rates are so low and identify factors that could increase angler participation in the program. And as I mentioned, you guys reviewed a presentation as well as the recommendations from the final report last October. And that final report is available on the action page for this framework if anyone would like to read it more in depth. But the general conclusion of the evaluation was that the program is not achieving its goals as originally intended, largely due to the lack of participation as well as concerns related to the reliability of the data submitted. The final report highlighted a number of key recommendations as highlighted on this slide. One of these key recommendations, which is outlined here in red, included considerations of regulatory changes to simplify the reporting process and eliminate the requirements to report fishing effort, which is the focus of this framework. So just focusing on feedback related to the reporting requirements that we received during that program evaluation, focus group participants emphasize that the complexity of the wording of the tilefish reporting requirements as a major barrier to compliance. Many fields were seen as overly technical, duplicative, or irrelevant to recreational fishing practices, leading to widespread confusion. Anglers noted challenges with reporting efforts, such as the need to break down trips by statistical area or provide granular details such as the number of hooks, depths, trip times that are difficult to recall or are not meaningful to recreational trips. They highlighted that many of the required fields seem to be carried over from commercial reporting systems. And although commercial and for-hire fishermen may be familiar with terms like statistical areas, that information is not necessarily intuitive to private recreational anglers. And then these requirements, coupled with the confusing layout and terminology in the reporting applications, have created a perception that the reporting is both burdensome as well as impractical. And as a result, fishermen reported low willingness to participate and raised concerns with the data being submitted and it being likely inaccurate or incomplete, undermining both the compliance and data utility. So given all that, the purpose of this framework is to consider regulatory changes to streamline the requirements and reduce the reporting burden. And the modifications are intended to improve overall reporting rates as well as the accuracy and reliability of private recreational tilefish catch estimates. And then the need for this action is to gather necessary recreational catch data that are not currently captured through dockside interviews or angler surveys to support effective management of these two species. So the first set of alternatives for consideration would modify the reporting requirements. And before I get into what the alternatives are, I would like to note that some of these alternatives, specifically 1B and 1C, could be selected individually or in combination of one another. So the first alternative, 1A, this would just be no action or the status quo option. This would maintain the current reporting requirements for vessel owners and operators that hold a private recreational tilefish permit to submit an EVTR for any trip retaining or fishing for tilefish. And this includes any trips that are targeting tilefish but may not actually catch either of the species. And the no action alternative would also maintain the current required data fields, which are listed on this slide. Based on feedback we heard from those focus groups related to reporting effort, alternative 1B would remove the requirement to report effort-only trips and only require submission of EVTRs for trips that catch or land blue line or golden tilefish. And then alternative 1C, this gets at the frustration with how complex the current requirements are and would aim to simplify the reporting requirements by by removing certain fields that either cause confusion or don't yield useful data. The list of fields that would be eliminated are provided on the left in the blue box, and then the ones that would be maintained are on the right in the green box. So this option would essentially cut the number of reported fields in half with the goal of still getting useful information, but simplifying things enough to minimize the associated burden and encourage anglers to report. As I alluded to earlier, the program evaluation revealed anglers' reluctance to submit an EVTR linked to confusion and burden associated with several fields currently required, particularly those related to fishing effort. And I will note that a lot of what they recommended was presented through Alternative 1C. And then we also met with Paul Nitschke, the stock assessment scientist for blue line and golden tilefish in the New England region, and kind of got his feedback on those as well. So those two groups really kind of drove what would be eliminated versus what would be maintained. And just some examples of what we heard during the program evaluation. They noted that current regulations require permit holders to separately report effort for each statistical area within a single trip, despite the recreational community's general lack of familiarity with the statistical areas used in fishery data collection. Additionally, some required effort fields lack the detail necessary to a meaningful link effort to species-specific catch. So linking, some of that effort-related information to blue line caught versus golden caught, and then while others are over granular and difficult to answer accurately, such as the number of hooks per line or depth, which can vary throughout a trip and across a single statistical area. And although effort information is reported, if reported accurately, can be valuable to understand, the current requirements impose a burden that at this point outweighs the potential benefits. And since the management's most immediate need is reliable catch information, it's important to prioritize simplifying reporting requirements to make them easier to understand and less cumbersome, which could be accomplished through the combination of Alternative 1B and 1C. And then once stronger participation is achieved, and as recreational anglers become more familiar with reporting their catch information, the council could always revisit a more refined approach to collecting effort data down the road if desired. And just to demonstrate how the location and the other effort-related fields complicates a report, I took a screen recording of me filling out a report. And Stephen, if you want to press play, hopefully this works. Yeah, so I don't know if you can really see, but this first page is kind of just the simple, straightforward information. Oh, Stephen, can you pause the video? Sorry. Yeah, so this first page is just general information about, the number of anglers on a vessel, as well as the time you leave port, the date of your trip, and things like that. So none of this is being proposed to change through this action. And then if we advance to the next part of the video, so once you get to the fishing tab, this is where the requirement to report effort comes into play, and a lot of where that confusion and perceived burden really starts. So for each effort, you have to indicate where you fished, how many hooks you used, and the amount of time you fished, as well as the depth. So essentially, you're submitting multiple trip reports in one of your fish reports if you're moving location. So each time you move location, you have to report a new effort and refill out this information. But this information lacks granularity because across a single area, you might be drifting across multiple depths, using multiple number of hooks and changing that out. So you're not capturing that granularity within each effort, and you're having to average it across, but then you're also having to complete a new effort each time you change fishing locations. And then once you get to the catches part of the video, so sorry, this is just walking through the video, and you could see, right, you select location, Then you have to select the number of hooks per line and depth or time soaked and depth. And then if you change fishing location, even within that, if within that first fishing location, depth is averaging or changing, then you change spots, you have to do this all over again. So again, you report the number of hooks fished, the average depth fished, so on and so forth. And then if you move fishing locations again, you have to do this again, do it all over again. So, if you fish 4 or 5 locations, you're having to go through this process multiple times. And this is where I think a lot of that burden or perceived burden is coming from. And then once you get to the catches tab, which is this next part, this is where you actually go and then report the number of tilefish caught and discarded. And again, you have to go to each effort. So here's effort 1, you click how many blue line you caught, how many you discarded, how many golden, and then you have to go to effort 2, do the same thing, go to effort 3, and again do the same thing. So every trip that you have multiple efforts, you're having to refill this information out multiple times. And then once you get to that last page, that's where you actually finalize your trip, where you came into port, and then the ending time of when you landed the fish, and then submit your trip report. So I think the complication is perceived, and that's where a lot of that burden is coming from. So kind of thinking through this, that's where those recommendations came. And then if we move on to alternative set 2, this would modify the trip report submission time frame. And similarly to that first set of alternatives, alternative 2B and 2C could be selected either individually or in combination. The first alternative, 2A, again, is the no action or status quo option. This would maintain the current requirement to submit an EVTR within 24 hours after entering port. Alternative 2B would require an EVTR to be filled out with all of the required information except for information not yet ascertainable, for example, time landed prior to entering port. So under this option, information would need to be filled out through a NMFS approved electronic reporting system as it becomes available. So this would mean that the vessel owner or operator would have to fill out the EVTR throughout the course of the trip. And then alternative 2C, this option will require the vessel owner operator to submit an EVTR as soon as they return to port before the fish is offloaded. So the program evaluation highlighted the challenges with enforcing the reporting requirements, especially given the 24-hour window to submit a trip report. If selected individually, alternative 2B preserves the flexibility by continuing to allow anglers additional time to submit their final EVTR, so within that 24-hour time frame, but it also requires that an EVTR be filled out in one of the NMFS approved electronic reporting system and available immediately upon returning to port. If alternative 2B was selected individually, this is kind of like a hybrid approach that could help address enforcement challenges by ensuring an electronic documentation exists at the end of the trip, giving law enforcement a record to check against the observed landings. And then additionally, alternative 2B also aligns the private recreational requirements with the existing logbook requirements for hire and commercial vessels, which this table just outlines a side-by-side comparison of what's currently required for commercial and for hire vessels compared to the private recreational tilefish anglers. So as you can see, for hire and commercial vessels, vessels must fill out a report with the required information except for information not yet ascertainable prior to entering port, unlike the private recreational requirements that indicate vessel operators may keep a paper record while on board and upload their data after landings. However, adopting alternative 2B and 2C, or even just 2C alone, provides the highest level enforceability, since enforcement personnel would be able to confirm on the spot that reporting obligations are fully satisfied. The combination of 2B and 2C would also eliminate the risk of incomplete records and maximize accuracy of data, since anglers would be required to fill out the EVTR throughout the trip, as well as submit the trip once they have returned to port prior to offloading any fish. And then option 2C also aligns regulations with the original council approved alternative during the development of Amendment 6. And at the time, the council supported that trips must be submitted upon landings because it's clear enforceability, as well as strong alignment with the program's purpose and need. It's also important to recognize that private recreational trips differ in nature from commercial and for-hire operations, so additional time to submit an EVTR may not be entirely necessary. For instance, commercial vessels often sell their catch to dealers, and until that transaction occurs, they may not have all the information necessary to complete their vessel trip reports, while for-hire vessels often run multiple trips per day, and the current regulations allow them additional time to finalize electronic submission to avoid disrupting their business behavior. So on that table, on this slide, just on the right-hand most column, commercial and for-hire vessels currently have 48 hours to submit their report, which is different from private recreational, which is currently 24 hours. But 2C would change that to as soon as the fish are landed before any fish are offloaded. Oh, excuse me. So before we get into today's discussion, this table outlines the tentative timeline for this framework. As noted at the start of the presentation, today we are here at Framework Meeting 1. So if the council decides to approve a range of alternatives during today's discussion in early 2026, staff would plan to continue to analyze the alternatives. We'd host a public input meeting to gather stakeholder feedback, as well as a Tilefish committee meeting to consider any stakeholder input and refine the options. And then we would return to the council to take final action tentatively in April 2026. And then spring and summer of 2026, staff would wrap up any documentation and submit the final package to NIMS for implementation. But I do want to recognize that since this action involves modifying some reporting requirements, implementation might not be as straightforward as some of our other actions. But we will work with GARFO on those details between now and final action to get a better idea of that timeline. And then also, in addition to the framework, staff is also continuing to think through some of the other key findings highlighted in that program evaluation and how to address them. Some of these efforts include continuing to do outreach in collaboration with the angling community, investigate ways to improve the existing approved reporting apps, and ways to improve collaboration and coordination with our management partners. And with that, we could take any questions and dive into the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you, Hannah. So let's start with questions on the presentation. Start with Joe Grist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hannah, good presentation. Thank you for all the work on this so far. For each of these data elements that are included in the app and the reporting, has there been any work done to actually identify this data stream, this piece of data is going to feed this element, such as this is going to feed stock assessment information, or this is going to feed permitting, versus this is just additional information we're collecting on the off chance we may want to look at it later for some type of effort study? Has there been any work done to identify which one of these elements may be a little bit more important than the other ones for what we need to do for the simplification process? Because I agree, I think there needs to be some simplification here.
Yeah, so For this action, there wasn't an FMAT or PDT developed, so that's why we met with Paul Nitschke to kind of get at those discussions to make sure we weren't, if we were to refine things, we weren't still asking questions that are going to be seen as overly burdensome and really not get information that we're going to use down the road anyways. So that's where this alternative 1C came from, and these green what's maintained in the green box, it came from those conversations as well as feedback through the program evaluation. And this, what's highlighted in this green box is really seen as like the first step of, this is the bare minimum that we need, right? So vessel name, permit number, that's just to help identify who these people are and who's fishing for tilefish. Then we get to date and time sailed and landed. That's just to get an overall idea of how long these trips are occurring. Number of anglers also helps with just understanding if we ever want to assess bag limits down the road. Understanding the number of anglers and the number of catch per trip will help with that, as well as just getting a basic understanding of the number of blue line and golden caught, landed, and discarded. That's really the information we need. That's our immediate need. And this stuff on the left might be useful and helpful down the road, but since we're not getting any information to begin with, we might as well start from somewhere in hopes to get better information, and then we can grow from there. But
Yeah, I had Skip and then Mike Penny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Hannah. That was a good presentation. And I was going to bring up that point about the area. Do we really need to know where they're fishing? And if we do, can't we go back to the blocks? Because the blocks of the, like for the for hire reporting, you just put in the area, the block, because chances are, no matter how many times you move, those blocks are a big enough area, you're going to be in the same block rather than asking them for, a report every time they move. Because I think that's where you're losing a lot of people too.
Thanks, Skip. Mike?
Yeah, Hannah, I just had a question because you mentioned when you were going through the feedback that you heard that a lot of people seem to be confused about or unclear on the stat areas. But when you went through your example of you filling out the VTR, it's not there. So I'm trying to understand that confusion.
yeah, sorry, I fumbled on that slide a bit. I was too honed in on the video that was being recorded. So that's just one of the reporting apps that is currently available to anglers at this time. And that one doesn't ask for statistical areas, but if they use Fish Online or any of the other reporting apps, and I do have a video of that one, I don't know if it will work. Stephen, does this video work? But this is the one that actually, it's kind of what Skip was saying, where it asks for statistical area and there's a question mark that provides more information, but the information it provides doesn't tell anglers where to go to find out what a statistical area is, or maybe where the chart of statistical areas are found. It's just kind of information that might be more informative to commercial and for hire anglers. So it depends on what reporting app you're using. And some of that conversation was about this app as opposed to EFIN, which was the one I showed. And I apologize for not mentioning that. Oh, and in the regulations, it does actually specify the chart area. Bring that back up.
Thanks. Thank you. Paul, did I see your hand up? No. Okay. So Lori, I think I'll go to you in a minute. Okay. So Chris and then Bobby and then Maureen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, kind of stay on this area fished topic. I guess for alternative 1C, where asking for port and state landed, is that enough for the assessment scientists and managers just get a general idea of where the landings are coming from along the range, as opposed to asking for stat areas or other blocks or ranges? Because I guess there's always, you did mention there's the option for adding more elements later if needed, but was just trying to figure out what they feel is appropriate enough as far as where are these fish coming from, and if just the port landed is a good enough indication for now.
Well, I think the immediate goal is just to get landings and discard estimates at this point, not necessarily concentrating on where those are coming from, because we don't have that information from MRIP anyways, right? So MRIP, you only get that information from if they were interviewed, right? They record where that interview takes place. So we can identify with private recreational anglers what stat area they're fishing in or where they're fishing, especially with Tilefish MRIP information, right? The further you break that down, it's not there, and those PSEs become astronomical. So I think at this point, right, anything is helpful. Like if we do ask what port they're landing in or what port they're leading in, I think we can make an educated guess as to where they're fishing. But I think the focus that we've been hearing from folks is let's focus on getting landings estimates to begin with.
Follow up, Chris?
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense. Yeah, what the primary goal is. I was just kind of thinking about down the line, and what you described may get to that is just if there's like disproportionate fishing effort on a particular canyon area or something like that. I think just this local knowledge of where people are fishing out of certain ports can kind of give us an idea of where that's coming from, as opposed to just somewhere between Nova Scotia and Cape Hatteras or something like that.
Bobby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, my question comment kind of just tags on to what was just said. I don't know if it needs to be a different mechanism than a stat area for the recreational aspect, if we can use a broader zone, but I don't like the idea of not having an area where the fish have came from, landings is one thing, but where the fish were actually removed from, especially considering how with blue line tile, where we have the sliver area, so we have a small management area it doesn't have an infinite number of fish, so we are going to be accountable to what is taken from that area. So, we need to be very mindful of trying to track everything that's removed from that area. So I don't know if it's a trade-off to where we don't need to be hyper precise with the stat areas like we are for the commercial side, but we do need to monitor roughly where these fish are coming out of, especially when it's a co-managed area that's kind of in flux. The other thing I can't agree with is, I believe it was option 2B, which on the reporting requirements, because the timeliness and the having certain numbers, certain fields filled in prior to, at the end of the trip, but not completed out, because that's very much similar to how commercial is. So there's a lot of alignment there. But I'd caution about not having the area that the fish came from, knowing that we are going to have an issue with blue line in this sliver area.
Thanks, Bobby. It's a good point. The proportion of harvest from these areas is certainly going to be something that we're going to be paying a lot of attention to. Whether or not this reporting is what gets us there, hopefully we can eventually. Maureen, did you have a question?
Thank you. I like to report a lot. Thank you. But my question is, based on my experiences with commercial fishermen and for hire, what is to compel the recreational harvesters to report? In New York, we actually have to take legal action against our commercial, not that we want to, but we have to take legal action against our commercial fishermen and the for hire in order to compel some of them to report. Is Garfo going to take the same tact as they do with their commercial fishermen? Thank you.
I mean, the short answer is no. We've talked about this, a few times. On the commercial side, we have two sources of information that we can cross-check. So we have vessel trip reports and we have dealer reports. So if there's a dealer report, no vessel report, then we know the vessel hasn't reported. If the vessel reports but the dealer hasn't, we know the dealer hasn't reported, and we can reconcile those two things. For private anglers, just like with for hires, we don't have a cross-check. There's no source of information to tell us someone hasn't reported. So unless enforcement officers are meeting vessels at the dock as they're coming in offloading tilefish, there's effectively no way for us to enforce these requirements.
Follow up?
Thank you. Will law enforcement issue tickets to the recreational fishermen?
You'd have to ask Office of Law Enforcement. I'm not sure if any of them are online for the meeting, but they would have to make that a management priority, which likely would mean they're taking away from some other fisheries related priority.
Okay, further questions, Scott Lennox?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Maureen, great point. That's exactly what I was going to ask because, and thanks for the presentation, Hannah. Good job there. That's exactly what I was going to ask. Well, what's the incentive for them to report? Because in our area, we've got what I would consider to be a really large contingency of blue line and golden tile fishermen, especially this summer because our tuna fishing wasn't very good. So everybody reverted to blue line and golden tile fishing. I don't know of anyone that's ever gotten any sort of even, tisk for not reporting. So with no penalty and a pain in the butt kind of way to report, I just don't see anything really changing. We can incentivize this and try and get folks to report, but just because it's going to help us out with data, I don't think that's enough of an incentive to get folks to do it. Otherwise, I think we would have seen that since the initiation of it. So I know it's tough because law enforcement's got enough on their hands as it is. But I don't think that anything's really going to change until we have some sort of either incentive or penalty for not reporting. Thanks.
Anna, did you have a follow-up to some of this discussion?
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify a couple things. So on the enforceability or enforcement, I think last year we got a report from NIMSLE that they did give a fine to one angler for not having their permit, and I think they can give up to a $500 fine. I think this was the first fine that they've given in the history of this regulation. So I think they can give a ticket for the permit at this point in time. I don't know that they can give a ticket for reporting, right? Because they have 24 hours. So law enforcement would have to follow up with them after that 24 hours to see if they actually reported. So I think there's difficulty there. And then just to get at Bobby's comments about keeping area of where these fish are coming from and stuff like that. So when thinking about the sliver, that's within the South Atlantic's management jurisdiction, so they wouldn't be subject to these reporting requirements. So it would only be mid-Atlantic landed fish. So we would still be able to have an understanding of what landings are coming from the mid-Atlantic region compared to the South Atlantic region. And yeah, in the regulations, actually the tilefish regulations, you can't fish in the mid-Atlantic and South Atlantic in the same trip, and that's highlighted for all across commercial and recreational for our tilefish species.
Thank you for that additional information. I think more or less we've been sticking with questions. Are there any further questions on the presentation? Okay, not seeing any answer in the council, I'll ask the public briefly. Any questions? Laura, do you have one?
I do. Hannah, I just wondered if a lot got eliminated, and I get it. I know with the stock assessment process and Paul Nitschke's wish list, if the size of the fish that were being caught could be entered, I think that's a huge component for him. And I just wonder if he mentioned it but dropped it, or this list is trying to be streamlined so you don't want to complicate it by adding something else. And I'm just wondering if the VTR has to be started upon leaving the dock. At least then if there were a boarding offshore or something, there could be a good faith effort that individual, the commercial fleet has to start their VTR before they leave the dock. So we make comparisons of the commercial versus the private recs often. And then we say, but we can't compare them in the next breath. So if they had to start the VTR, the EVTR, before they left the dock, that would at least show good faith. And can I just make one comment? It's not really a question. When you showed us the program performance, and you showed us that there's such a high number of permits being issued versus how many are actually being used in a given year, how many permits are actually reporting. This is an open access permit. And I think across the board, whether you're commercial fishing, if there are open access permits that we all have access to, and if you looked at whiting, open access, you look at the number of permits that are issued at the beginning of the year for the commercial fleet versus how many actually put fish on the dock, it's a huge disconnect. Same thing with the tilefish. You have to have the open access tilefish permit for the commercial. So if you look at the number that are actually issued versus the number that actually report landings, the difference is huge. So I don't think that because we have this high number of recreational permits being issued versus how many are actually reporting, I don't think we should put so much weight on that as a huge issue. Like I said, I just don't see that. And then I think when we're looking at MRIP, when you look at tilefish data now, we have 3 inputs. We have MRIP, we have the LPS, and we have the EVTR. And we're stacking the performance of the EVTR against those 2 databases. MRIP has been, we've been told over and over again, don't really consider that. The landings are all over the place. The intercepts with MRIP don't happen in this particular fishery. It's an offshore fishery. So let's not put too much weight on MRIP data. Then we have the LPS survey. That's a pelagic survey. That is not a bottom tending. It's not for goldens or blue lines. It's for the pelagic stocks that are, that the recreational sector uses and goes fishing with. And now suddenly we've got that in the lineup producing numbers that are higher than the EVTR also. I don't think it's fair to compare the performance of the EVTR reporting to those 2 databases. They've got huge flaws, and yet we're assuming the EVTR is no good. And I know there's not a lot of incentive, and we don't have a lot of fines and violations being reported every year. But if you look at the number of vessels reporting, it's going up every year. The numbers are going up every year. I think the outreach that the council did and you hired to have done was huge. And I think next year, because of that, we can expect another increase. So that's a comment. It was long-winded. I'm sorry. I'll go back to being quiet.
All right. Well, thank you, Lori. I appreciate that. And I'm going to look, Mr. Fletcher, do you have a question on the presentation?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
What reporting app did Hannah use, and did she ever consider using the Bluefin Data app that the United National Fishermen's Association has tried to get the council to use for 10 years for reporting for recreational fishermen? The Bluefin Data app is exactly modeled on the Bluefin Data app that the federal require the commercial fishermen to report on. So why didn't she use the Bluefin Data app in this presentation? Is the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. I don't personally have access to the Bluefin Data app, so that's why I didn't use it. I have access to eFin and I have access to Fish Online. And I was just trying to show an example. Currently, the Bluefin app is one of the NMFS approved reporting apps. So private recreational anglers can download that one, put in their vessel information, permit information, and report a tilefish trip that way. I just didn't show it because I don't have access to it.
If I may follow up, if you will call Bluefin Data, they will make you have access to it in a heartbeat. but the frustration by the United National Fishermen's Association and me personally is 10 years have passed. It's time for the council to require a decent reporting app. And that's a frustration. This has been available. The council is dragging its feet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. I saw a hand in the audience, Greg DiDomenico. And Greg, I think on the public side, we've gone into comments as well as questions. So at your discretion, if you have both, go ahead.
Just a question, I think it may be for the agency to answer. Is a private angling vessel capable of obtaining a open access golden tilefish permit?
You need a commercial permit?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to look into the regs and see on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Greg. I think that's all the hands I see from the public. So coming back to the council, staff is looking for guidance on the draft alternatives. I've heard some thoughts on that. So interested in how we're looking to proceed. Are there specific alternatives that folks want to talk about? Because eventually we will be looking for a motion on this. So. Go ahead, Mike Luzzi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to get back to just for a minute the area consideration. So I've heard a couple things. I believe area was removed from the list of things that we're asking for. But area to me is really, really important. It's the delineation between the two stocks as we're managing them. And while I understand you're not allowed to fish in two places, you're not allowed to go into the South Atlantic you can't fish in both places at the same trip. You can assume that everything's coming from one area. I don't know that we should take our foot entirely off the gas there. And I say that because uncertainty is something that we deal with, and uncertainty is everywhere. Recreational data and recreational uncertainty is the highest of the uncertainties in my mind that we face and deal with. And I understand, I really do understand that fishermen they feel burdened by having to provide information on their trips. But I think the time for complaining about something being too burdensome or frustrating, those days they're about to be over. I mean, we're having a difficult time with the estimations that come from the recreational fishery and just doing our jobs. And while I question a little bit kind of taking our foot off the pedal on the information that we're asking for, I do understand how we're trying to get more information. So there's that fine balance. And I think that this council, given that this is an action where we're mandating recreational reporting, it's unique, to say the least, in the Mid-Atlantic, where we have mandated recreational reporting. We need to be careful with this. I don't want to provide too much of a leash so that fishermen kind of get their minds around the fact that, well, if the council or the agency puts some kind of requirement on us recreationally, if it's too hard, we just won't do it. And then eventually they'll just get rid of it. That can't be the thought process moving forward. And so I do agree that this is the opportunity to take the concerns on a newly mandated project for collecting blue line and tilefish data. I just want to, I have a little caution in the back of my mind that we don't pull back too far so that we're not getting what we need. So I would like the area to be thought of maybe as it being folded back in. If it's something as simple as an area, I think what Skip said, the NOAA codes, or just something more general. It's hard for me to believe that when you wake up in the morning to go on a tilefish trip, that you don't know where you're going. and you don't know when you'll be back. You're going far enough on the, if you're fishing under the Bay Bridge out of a canoe, coming out of the Severn River in the Naval Academy, yeah, okay. You might go all over the place, but when you go out tile fishing, you have a destination. You're not stopping the throttle at some given, you know where you're going to be. So I don't think the area should be that hard to be able to provide to us so that we have a better understanding about the distribution of the catch, not just the catch. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I look to Joe Grist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to comment on alternatives set to alternatives 2B and 2C. I think Hannah had noted in the document that those could be considered individually or in combination. I'd want to consider that in combination. In alternative 2B, something it kind of, every time I read it, it sticks out is we'll fill out all the required information except for information not ascertainable, time limited, prior to entering port, versus 2C, which was be prior to offloading fish. I think the two ought to be merged because that prior to entering port requirement is a common issue with the commercial fishermen, sometimes having to do certain things prior to getting to a safer place to do landings or get there, take care of things. It's a common theme. And I'd be remiss if I ignored their comments on such things about getting to a safe place to do your reporting or do a safe place to do your tagging and not consider it here as well. Someone may be running ahead of a storm, maybe trying to get off. They're in smaller boats a lot of times. I think the two ought to be merged and we ought to just be focused more on prior to offloading fish. If enforcement checks them, they should be checking them before they offload the fish anyway. So it's a good way to check off, hey, have you done UEPTR? They can check it right on the spot. My thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Joe. And Hannah or staff, correct me if I'm wrong. So we have the possibility today, and you've shown the timeline of where this goes next, but of accepting the full range of alternatives to move forward at this meeting, or we could look to a motion that would have something more specific if we're looking to make edits, right? Okay. And so it sounds like we have one potential edit that instead of these being two separate alternatives, that they're combined. So let's keep that in mind for motions. Any other discussions on the alternatives seen? Okay. So not seeing any other hands on this, then I would be looking for a motion. And, oh, sorry, Hannah, go ahead.
Just a question of clarification. So right now, as it's laid out, the council could adopt, like, for example, 2B and 2C combined. So it would have the same effect of merging them together. So I don't know if there's a preference to merge them together for some reason, or you could keep them separate and still identify them both as the preferred alternatives.
Right, very fair. So I would look to, Joe, since this is something that you were thinking about as far as just moving it forward, as Hannah pointed out, we could move it forward as presented today, and the council would still have the option of having that combined, right? So
I'm good with that.
okay, so again, then I'll be looking for a motion. Hannah, I don't know if you have anything up on without a preferred alternative, what that would look like. Okay, so Joe, you said, go ahead.
I move to adopt the range of alternatives as presented today. Do we want to give this a title? What we're actually talking about? Is that all you need?
Alternatives.
Yep, yeah, Joe, I think we're
For the recreational tilefish reporting framework. There you go.
Yep.
I wanted to make sure I said exactly what she wrote. So.
Very good. So we have a motion on the table by Joe Chris. Do I see a second? Bobby Rule. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Jose?
I just have a question about this motion. There was a little bit of discussion regarding statistical areas or perhaps longitude and latitude where the animals were caught. And Lori Nolan also talked about the fish size. Are those things that you want us to further consider under this range of alternative as well? And I think that the reason I say that, I think that the statistical area, I kind of understand why a recreational angler will be confused about that, but longitude and latitude, that's probably something that is relatively easy to report. I don't know how many people are going to feel that they don't want to give away, the hole where they're fishing, especially if they're catching a lot of fish. I don't know, but that's something that perhaps we can further consider. And also the length, I don't remember if we had those discussions earlier, Hannah, about the size of fish, but I think that that's a good point that Lori Nolan made. So if okay with you, perhaps those are things that we can further continue to explore.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I kind of assumed, especially since looked like several of the apps already allow that information, that lawn would be one of the possible parameters for area in the discussion of how that reporting is achieved. But I'll look to other council members if they had thoughts or concerns to what Jose mentioned. Mike?
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. This just brings me back to the point I tried. Is area something that we're interested in obtaining information about? Right now, the way I see this, and my question is, if this motion passes and we're moving forward, that block that only contained the information we'd be asking the fishermen for, that's it, right? We can't change anything later, or would if we wanted area to be considered in that, is that a motion to amend to have area as maybe it's an alternative? That way we can decide later if we're going to add it or not. I just functionally, I don't know how that little the two tables next to one another, later on, are we going to be able to slide things back and forth or not? Because I think that's important for all of us to understand before we vote.
Fair enough, and I think you got the question clearly at the end. So Hannah, if you don't mind just getting on the mic and responding, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so for a framework action, meeting 1 is just approving the range of alternatives as kind of more conceptual. As long as come final action or throughout the development of these alternatives over the next several months before we return, we can shift things slightly around as long as the intent is still there. So if it's simply with those side-by-side boxes, shifting some things to the maintain box and some things to the get rid of box, I think that would be fine, because the intent is still there, that we would streamline the requirements and simplify them. And I don't know if Mike Penny wants to, okay, never mind.
Okay, thank you for that. Mike, follow-up?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. Thanks, Hannah, for that. I think it would be helpful to, at our next meeting, to just have some ideas about other area type of measurements that we could consider, whether they are small and as precise as lat long or more general like NOAA code or something like that. For the next meeting, I think it would be helpful.
Okay, I see Bobby and then Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the area, I mean, it's important information, but I think there's easy ways around that. I'm not an app builder. I am not that tech savvy, but I don't see an issue where an end user will be able to enter his coordinates lat and long, and that can generate, you're in stat area X, stat area 236. So it automatically assigns the stat area. So each individual angler doesn't have to memorize each individual boundary for the stat areas. I think that's something that's fairly low hanging fruit, and I think that could be achieved pretty easily. If I was looking at it correctly, I thought that the provision for either length or weight was still going to be something that was going to be recorded, because that is, I would think that would be very important, because at the end of the day, we manage in pounds, not numbers of fish. So unless we're going to use an aggregate number and assume that every recreational fish was always going to be X number of pounds, I think using, if we have just a total length, even if we don't have weight, we can apply length weight keys to give us a better metric. But, I'd be just having the number of fish, I really don't think is going to be informative at all.
Chris and then Rich.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, actually I'm thinking more about, length requirements that, I know we're trying to strike a balance between not asking too much and getting what we need, but not asking enough and then have to add more stuff later, which is an option, but it's a little harder to do when we probably could try to get the stuff now. So that might be something to consider, as opposed to assuming an average weight. And likewise, I think with the location, at first I was satisfied with the port of landing being or in state being a decent proxy as far as where people are going. But if we want to, where people are fishing, but if we want to come up with something else that avoids the option that you gave, Hannah, where every time you fish a different set of coordinates, you have to go enter all that information again and remember exactly how many fish you caught on each drop. Try to strike a balance between making this too complicated to where people aren't reporting again, which is why we're doing this, and then give us the information we need and get better compliance and buy-in is key. So I support staff kind of kicking around some ideas on where that balance might be.
Thanks, Chris. Rich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's pretty obvious that we need to streamline the survey, but at the same time, I don't want to waste this opportunity. If they're filling out the survey already, asking general location isn't unreasonable. And in our state, we have, like Bobby mentioned, we have formats to make it very easy for respondents to do in GIS, for example. We could have predefined areas and all they would have to do is click on it, something like that. That's pretty simple to do in GIS. Also, now the way I look at Alt 1C is, and I'm perfectly fine with modifying the reporting fields, but that implies to me that we could also add something in there as well, because the way it's written, it just says modify required reporting fields. And from the stock assessment perspective, size is probably the most important thing we can get out of the survey, because for obvious reasons, and not necessarily effort. Fishery dependent efforts kind of tricky to use in stock assessments, but the sizes are really, really valuable, and we don't have that information for the stock assessments. So I would like to have that flexibility to add something like report the sizes, and it's not that many, shouldn't be that many fish landed on a vessel and on a trip. And just like Mr. Luisi said, this is where we're headed for recreational fisheries management. We have to get this data. Otherwise, if we don't get it from this survey, then we can't get it from the MRIP. So that's why I guess my question is, can we add one thing? Definitely location, but maybe add some size information. Thanks.
Yeah, so if that's Rich, I guess a question to Hannah is, would we need to amend the motion to add that, or within the motion is it covered?
I think we might want to amend this motion. It might be as simple as modified today rather than as presented today, because there wasn't anything presented that would add to the reporting requirements, like add new things. So I think based on this discussion, we could come back with some potential additional things like length and weight and what's being discussed today. But we might want to just modify that last part of the motion to as modified today.
Okay, I think that makes sense. I saw a head nod from the maker of the motion, and I'll look to the seconder, head nod from the second. So I think we could make that as a friendly then. Thanks, Rich. Any other discussion from the council? Assuming that has everything in there, I see at least one hand online, so I will look to the public for comments on the motion, and I'll start with Dewey Hemmelwright. Dewey, if you're there, it looks to me like you're still on mute. Okay, not seeing any change. Any other comments from the public on the motion? Dewey, one last shot. All right. Sorry about that, Dewey. We'll see if we can get back to you at another time, but I am going to call in particular on this motion. I'm going to call the question. So the motion is to move to adopt the range of alternatives for the private recreational tilefish reporting framework as modified today. Motion by Joe Grist, second by Bobby Rule. I'll ask this. Is there any objection to the motion? Go ahead, Scott. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, quickly, Joe. And I want to see where this goes. I really do want to see where this goes, but I want to say why I'm objecting to it, because I don't think we're doing anything to get more folks to report on tilefish. I think if we move this forward, if anything, some of the discussion around the table about the areas and that sort of thing, I think it's going to have less people want to participate in reporting their tilefish. I've talked to these guys for 2 years since we started doing this. I really made an attempt personally to do some outreach in my area with my fishing report. We've even said it on our television show in the area. And every time their interest was piqued, they would say, "What happens if I don't report?" And my answer was, nothing really. You're just helping us out with data. You're helping us so that sometime down the line, you don't get stuck with, your bag limit going down, your size limit going up. That's really the only justification I could give to them. So with that being the case, I don't think any of this other information really going to matter. It's a pain to fill these things out for these guys. Enforcement is difficult, and in the long run, nothing is going to happen to them if they don't report. So unfortunately, I don't see it moving anywhere. I would like to see, it all to me comes down to, are we okay with the people that are reporting, getting the information that we want from them, and maybe the few that we gained through outreach and that sort of thing as we do that? That's intriguing to me. So I do want to see where it goes, but I just really, if I sound pessimistic, I apologize, but talking to these people personally, I just don't see any of them reporting after we come out of this. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, Scott. And I didn't see any other hands go up. So, Sonny?
Now I'm on. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for that, Scott, because I wholeheartedly agree with you. The more you put on this, the worse it's going to get. In my opinion, what you need to do is just start out with 2 simple things. You went fishing, and this is how many fish you caught. I mean, we've been kicking this can down the road for a long, long time, and it's the same thing. And if you just come up and just start easy, how many fish did you catch, period, and see where that goes, I'll guarantee the public, when they look at these alternatives, will look at that and say, well, this looks easy, and I'll guarantee you'll probably get something out of it. But as it is like this, I'll have to agree with Scott. I won't support it. Thank you.
Okay, well, can't hurt to try. With that, I'm going to ask for a show of hands. So all of those in favor of the motion, then please raise your hand. All of those opposed? And we had 2 online, so Chris Kuhn and Michelle Duvall.
14.
So I had 14, yep. 14 to 4. Okay. And any abstentions? None. Okay. So 14-4. Okay. So the motion passes. Hannah, is there anything else that you need?
Nope, thank you so much.
Go ahead, Skip.
One more comment and question to Hannah. The EVTRs, why are they so low? I just looked up the Rudy Angler on iFish, and in 3 trips, he had 756 blue line tiles. And on the blue line tiles on the EVTRs, I think the highest number was 400 and something. And that was just 3 trips.
Was that a private recreational trip?
For hire.
Oh, so this EVTR,
Oh,
presents
that's
it, that's just
recreational?
private recreational.
Gotcha.
It's not showing any for hire data.
Okay, sorry.
Comment, Mike Penny?
Well, not on that, but just a response to a question from earlier from Gregory Domenico, in terms of whether a private recreational vessel could obtain a commercial golden tilefish permit, incidental open access permit. I'd want to use my staff, who obviously aren't available this week, to confirm this, but at first blush, it looks like they could, but they would also have to get an operator permit, and then they would be considered a commercial vessel for purposes of reporting every trip they make using a federal VTR. The fact that there would not likely be any coincident dealer reports would suggest something is going on, and maybe they misrepresented themselves when they applied for their permit, which would also be a violation. So I think it might be a mix of things where they technically could, but then there would be implications of them doing so that they might not want to do. So we can follow up, Greg, if you're interested.
Okay, thank you, Mike, for looking into that. So, Hannah, if nothing else, I appreciate everything so far, and we look forward to moving this along. And I will be moving on to the next agenda item. I'm going to try and get through one more, and then I will I'll have us take a quick break. So next up is a presentation that was supposed to be given by Dr. Papakostas on the MRIP program. We are looking to Jason Didden from staff to pinch hit, given the current shutdown. So I'll let Jason settle in. Some of you have seen, I think, versions of this. Presentations have been done, including for our own SSC. For some of you may have had a chance to tune in there. So Jason, whenever you're ready, you can take it away, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Catherine would be a superior presenter here. I have been involved in MRIP or its predecessor since I've been at the council. So hopefully I'll be able to answer questions, but some things we may need to defer to S&T when they're back. So 2 main updates for today. 1, potential improvements to the fishing effort survey, the FES, and then also some updates on work on a recreational fishing data collection partnership to try to identify and make further improvements. And then there's a few ancillary other updates. So first part, fishing effort survey. Again, our recreational catch estimates primarily come from 3 data sources. We've got this fishing effort survey, and that is total numbers of trips. Then we have dockside intercepts, that's catch per trip. At its core kind of component, if you have total number of trips, multiply by catch per trip, you get total catch. We also integrate some, there's a for-hire telephone survey and for federal for-hire vessels, their VTRs are used for their effort estimates, but for a private boat and shore, it's primarily the dockside intercept for catch per trip, and then this mail survey for fishing effort. So the NIMS did a pilot study and then a large-scale study throughout 2024 to test a revised design. They were trying to figure out there's this discrepancy between what the estimates were and what people were reporting in terms of fishing intensity. So they did this pilot study and then a large-scale test in 2024. These are the components of the large-scale test. So increased frequency of administration. So they're mailing these every month instead of every 2 months. They changed the question order a little bit in terms of how often have you gone fishing in the last month or two to how often have you gone fishing in the last year. They split the reference point, the reference period. The 2-month fishing activity question was split into 2 individual 1-month questions. And then the composite estimation is they kind of get an initial effort estimate with data in 1 month, supplement it in another, and combine them through some kind of complicated statistical methods. If folks want to dive into that, I'm definitely going to have to defer on that particular topic. So this is the questionnaire. The FES is on the left, the experimental on the right. Again, I've gotten these a few times. You all may have also. And on the left, the order is a little different. When you look at number 15, it starts, if you went, then number of days saltwater fishing in January and February, and then number of days in the last 12 months. On the right, they talk about the number of days in the last 12 months, then month by month. And we'll get into a little more details. That order seems like it shouldn't matter a whole lot, but it turns out that it had some impact. What are those impacts? So on the left is the range of basically comparing the new design with those tweaks we just talked about, including that question word ordering and some of those other things, again, switching to the monthly estimates. But when it comes down to it, the mean boat estimate for effort went down by about 1/4. That's on the left. And on the shore, the estimates went down by about 10%. So that's like the overall impact. The boat estimates down by about 1/4, the shore estimates down by about 10%, roughly. If you break it down wave by wave, it starts to kind of get into what's driving this. And so like in the high effort months, say the highest, maybe July, August, there wasn't a big change. In fact, on the shore side, the new design actually went up a little bit. But in the shoulder months and the off season, the new design resulted in a good bit lower effort. And basically what they think is going on here is that in those low fishing activity waves, that there's a motivation for over-reporting because people have a desire to be identified as an angler. So during times of the year when there's not much fishing, people are more likely to over-report their fishing trips in order to identify themselves as an angler. And in like the survey literature, it's like a known phenomena. It's been kind of termed social desirability bias, which is documented in the survey literature when respondents report behaviors that align to kind of what they view as socially valued identities, here being an angler. And so the survey essentially gives them a chance to say, I'm a fisherman, and they take it, even if the information they provide isn't entirely accurate. So in the busy fishing season, anglers are actually fishing, so they can accurately report their trips, but in the lower activity waves, there's this tendency to over-report trips because then I'm an angler. I must have gone fishing, is essentially what's going on there. So that's why they think you see this discrepancy in the high activity waves. There wasn't much of a change, but in low activities, you see that wave, that change. And by switching that word, the question order, it still allowed people to kind of report being an angler, but not set up with a pre-reported, this is how many times I went fishing the last 2 months. So that getting that first, like, did you go fishing the last 12 months? That kind of satisfied that desire to report fishing. And so then it didn't impact their reports of how many times they went fishing in the last 2 months. That's what they think that's going on here. And it's, again, it's consistent in survey literature. Oops. Okay, next slide here. There we go. Okay, if you break it down by state, there's a lot of variability state by state. One reason for that is that we saw there are different reductions of private boat fishing versus shore fishing. There's different amounts of boat fishing and shore fishing across the states. So that's one reason why you're getting some different results on a state-by-state basis. And they think another impact was just the higher, there was more intensity of sampling during this, during the 2024 kind of intense pilot side-by-side, or the side-by-side, and I think that just led them to hitting more households with anglers, and that was kind of another component, and hitting more households that have high avidity anglers. So key findings and conclusions from the work that they did here. So the differences were more pronounced in the private boat mode and in low activity waves. They think it's this bounding, they think it's this desire to identify as an angler, and the bounding effect that is put in, that is created by switching that question order, allowing them to report total annual activity first, dampened the effect of that bias. And that's kind of what brought the estimates down. The study also demonstrated the feasibility of monthly sampling, as well as that composite estimation design, where they're again getting an initial estimate and then adding more data later with additional survey results. And so that design kind of really, they think, is addressing this measurement error that's created by a couple, again, survey bias issues that are, again, have been identified in literature, survey literature generally. So 2026, what are they doing? They're going to implement the revised design. They think it minimizes that social desirability bias. The question order switch reduces this telescoping effect of where they're not fully, they're not bounding their most recent effort by their kind of full annual effort. It also closely aligns to the 2023 pilot. And they did some cognitive interviews with anglers, and just got general reports that that question order switch seemed to make sense more, and it just the survey instrument just made more sense to people as they were working through it. So there is also it was just a week or two ago, if we have these new estimates, and they indicate all of our old estimates may be biased a bit high, you have to figure out a way to calibrate the whole time series. So Paul Rago actually chaired that review. It took place a week or two ago. And so it's not going to be like a simple calibration. It may vary by species, because different species are caught more in shore or private boat. Different species caught more in the summer months where there isn't a big of a reduction versus the winter months where we saw a bigger reductions. So it's not going to be like a simple switch. All the species are going to vary a bit of, some species there may not be a big change. Other species there may be more than the average 25 and 10% roughly that we talked about earlier. And then they have this revised design for monthly estimates and for monthly surveying, but they're not going to move to monthly estimates because of resource constraints in 2026. The monthly surveying may allow them to do that in the future, but they're kind of analyzing resource constraints to see if in the future they can take those monthly data and produce monthly estimates. So an overview of the timeline, they wrapped up the study report in the summer. They're going through peer review, both of the method itself and the calibration. They're working on a transition plan to kind of communicate to councils and science centers and regional offices about different considerations, like, when, if this data isn't available for use in assessments until spring 2026, what does that mean in terms of when it can sequence into future assessments and management? So that's the first component of the update that NIMS MRIP staff wanted to present. The second component is this partnership re-envisioning. So about a year ago, the previous AA directed MRIP to basically evaluate their long-term partnerships, how they are trying to identify ongoing improvements, and how to kind of make sure that the priorities that MRIP is moving forward with in terms of surveying and estimation aligns with the partners like the councils. So they talked to a lot of the partners. They did a bunch of listening sessions, and there's a draft report that's currently going through review at NIMS. It hasn't kind of gotten through its final clearance yet, but these are the primary priorities at the national level. Not surprising: accuracy, precision, timeliness, more biological data. Try to, there's a strong desire for at least some anglers to report their catch, but it's a non-probability sample. It's a strong possibility that avid anglers are going to be more interested in using that reporting, and that has the potential to really bias results from self-selected reporting. Ensuring consistent centralized and data warehousing, and then trying to facilitate the development of adaptive management that kind of account for our data limitations. And then on the Mid-Atlantic side, a similar mix of priorities are a little different, but similar overall mix of priorities. So originally, MRIP had intended to have a series of regional workshops in person and trying to update the partnership model by 2026, but they don't have resources to do that anymore. So they've pivoted for kind of a targeted national and regional improvements guided by this framework document that will be cleared hopefully soon. And so we're kind of waiting for that NOAA DOC clearance for that framework report to be approved, and then start working with the partners on this targeted improvement to this overall approach to how to keep moving forward with improved recreational data collection. But again, they're not doing this kind of in-person outreach, in-person workshop approach anymore due to just general reduced staffing and resource constraints. Okay, so a few other program updates, and actually I wanted to put one other thing up on the screen that I thought would be interesting, and I think I by accident closed. Stephen, can you, I'm gonna just join the webinar here, and once I do, if you could make me a presenter, please. I just connected into the webinar. Go. Share Firefox. Share. So this wasn't in the this wasn't in their presentation, but I think is useful in terms of expecting continual improvements and changes to recreational data collection over time. And so I think as part of may have been Inflation Reduction Act monies, but the Gulf got a good chunk of money for data improvements. And this was linked in the briefing materials in the briefing book. But I just want to review a few of the projects that were selected for funding, just to kind of give a flavor of some of the things that are being looked at. So this one was incorporating satellite imagery to estimate private offshore recreational fishing effort. This one was estimating reef fish discards using camera-based monitoring. This Moat Marine Laboratory looking at effort with shore-based cameras. I wish them good luck. You all recall I embarked on a similar project that hopefully they'll pick up a few of lessons learned from that project. This University of South Florida one, looking at self-reported versus observer discard rates. Let's see if these last two were quite interesting. Calculating private recreational fishing effort with smartphone mobility data, satellite imagery, and aerial surveys. So like combining satellite data, drone recordings, and I think a lot of us, when we've downloaded apps and you hit like accept, we are sharing our location data with these clearinghouse informations, and it was a surprisingly high percent of the population who has opted in some way to this sharing. So they're like tapping into that network to like track where people are going and how many people might be like parking at boat ramps. And so and then this last one, again, another using mobile phone tracking to quantify recreational fishing effort. So these are like the Gulf projects. They requested, we want like cutting edge things, looking at AI, video, satellite, and these are the projects that are funded. I don't know what the timeline is for these to be potentially integrated into actual estimates, but just a flavor of there's more research that's going to be going on and at some point considered for integration into recreational fishing estimates. Okay, that was an aside, but I thought it was interesting. I think I can just share this again, so I have this open. Let's see here. Okay, Stephen's got it back up. Thanks, Stephen. Current slide, hold on a second. Okay. Okay. Few other things. NIMS had a review of their survey and data standards. I think these were more like, when do you not publish super uncertain estimates, or what's an appropriate way to combine data, things like that. So yeah, they established some revised standards and they asked for a peer review of that. And they're expecting the end of this year, early next year, we'll get the kind of final report from this independent review of, what are the best practices for kind of key data uses, and there are these other federal guidelines for how you distribute information, how do you flag on certain information, things like that. So that I'm sure at the end of this year or early next year, we'll see that. And again, it's things like survey design, data quality issues, transition planning, review procedures, things like that. And then the other thing that they are going to flag, NIMS has instituted some new partner review procedures for recreational catch estimates, where I know they used to just have kind of some wave meetings, technical folks would gather. Well, they have kind of a new collaborative approach to try to get more people looking at initial estimates. So this will be, this presentation will be published. If you click on that link that says robust procedure, it'll kind of it'll describe the full set of steps that they're going to try to get more eyes on early data estimates and get feedback. Are there things that look out of whack? And so if you go and click on that robust procedure, it is a full description of kind of their new procedures for review. And that is the end of the slides.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you pinch hitting there. You know, these were informational items on our agenda to keep the council up to date. As I mentioned, some folks may have had a chance to see at least that first presentation already. So I will look to the council if there are hands for questions, understanding that we may not have the team here to answer all of them. Jim, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. And yeah, Jason, this is probably a question I'll aim towards you, but Mike Penny may actually have to answer it and get back to us later. So, and I've seen all the efforts in MRIP. I may have missed some, but just a thing that's still concerning me was 2 years ago, New York embarked on doing a fee-based license because of we knew it was poor compliance. Our law enforcement folks were saying we probably only had a 30% compliance with you know, in terms of MRIP. So we got data from NOAA Fisheries on that, and what was surprising was the rate of non-compliance for a lot of the states. Now, the two states that don't have a fee-based license, New York and New Jersey, we won. We had a 75 and an 83% non-compliance rate, which is kind of understandable because in the state of New York, we have counties that won't even enforce it now. You write a ticket, they won't even let the judges won't even look at it because it's a free license. So what, you know, what's the problem? Just a caveat on this: the way this data came from NOAA Fisheries, it's a little bit backwards. They actually looked at the phone book of everybody who wasn't in the registry and went out to them to find out why, you know, what was going on. And it's turning out there's a large percentage of people, like up to 80% of people that are not in the registry that are saltwater fishing. So that's a big concern. I mean, they're trying to fix MRIP and make it better and some of the, I guess, analysis that's being on looks like we're tweaking the mechanism for it to work better, but are we really getting at that compliance issue? Because there lies the problem. If we don't have good compliance, we're just never going to get good data from MRIP. So what I was going to ask are two things. First off, from that data, this data is from 2019. It's NSAR State Evaluation Summaries from NOAA Fisheries. Is that data, you know, the efforts being done now, is that really aimed at improving compliance at all? Because again, that's an important factor of this. So that would be question number one, Mike. Are they actually, they did this summary or this look at this in 2019. Are they going to do that again, or can they do that again to see is the compliance improving as we're trying to improve the overall MRIP? Thank you.
So, yeah, I don't know. We'd have to talk to the MRIP team, but when you say compliance, maybe I missed it. Can you clarify complying with the requirement to get to be in the registry? Okay. As opposed to complying with the effort survey when it comes in the mail, or complying with intercepts when they show up where you're fishing.
Well, part of my caveat, my understanding was that was the compliance to be in the registry itself. But again, the way this was done, and this was explained to me from some of the NOAA staff, was it was done backwards. They looked at it through the lens of not how many people were in the registry, simplifying it the best in my, you know, that I could understand it. They have a phone book of everybody that's in the registry of the United States. That's what MRIP did. we want your contact information. So they took that and then they compared it to the rest of the United States. So all these people shouldn't be fishing that were in this other data set. And they were contacting that group of coastal states. And that's where they found a large percentage of them are fishing. So somehow they took those numbers and they came up with a non-compliance to be in the registry. And again, I don't understand the nuances of it, but there were very high rates. I think the best state was maybe 50%. And that was, again, a concern. If we're ever going to fix MRIP, we really need to improve that compliance rate.
Jason, did you have a response?
Yeah, so the effort survey is a dual frame survey that they sample the U.S. Postal Service list of residential addresses matched to the registry information, and then they sample the licensed and unlicensed households kind of at different rates. And to improve efficiency, they focus, and then it's weighted, so it's not like they're accounting for the weight. But so folks who are not licensed still have some chance to get sampled. And so it's not like if even those unlicensed folks, they can still potentially get the effort survey. And then again, the weighting procedures that they use for estimation kind of account for the relative proportion of unlicensed and licensed anglers. So there's some accounting for that already built into their dual frame system. And I'm pretty sure that, in terms of like the MRIP, the state staff who do the dockside intercepts for, what did you catch? Can I look at it? Can I measure it? They are not enforcement personnel. I'm pretty sure that NIMS is not going to try to have those folks be working on. I think they like to try to keep them away from any compliance because they want maximized participation. If there's going to be some kind of increased compliance, it seems like it would be at the state level who's having the licenses. Is my initial thought on that.
Yeah, and what I think corroborates it is essentially from our local data in New York, our law enforcement data indicates they only see a 30% compliance. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole here, but at some point, I'm just really trying to get an update on that, that compliance rate, because the reality was if New York only has a 30% compliance rate, every one of the states had to get an exemption from MRIP to do their state system. And if we're only having that low a compliance rate, how could we be complying with Magnuson? MSA required us to provide accurate data. If it's so low a compliance rate, it's not accurate data. So therefore, it's something we need to look at. But step one would simply be, what is the compliance rate, for each one of the states? And is that improving based upon the MRIP improvements from 2019? Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I got Chris Batch, Savage, and then Rich Wong.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And thank you for giving the presentations today, Jason. The FES recalibration results are very interesting, and you're right, it's going to have big impacts on particular species and states, the way it all lays out. In some ways, probably more complicated than the recalibration that was done 7 years ago. But I might have missed this in your presentation, but you kind of showed an overall kind of a percent change in trips by shore mode and private boat. And I was surprised that the shore mode rather didn't decrease by that much compared to private boat. But meantime, when we did the recalibration back in 2018, we saw the biggest increase in number of trips from the shore mode. Was there any thoughts from the folks analyzing this information as to why there wasn't a bigger decrease in the shore mode? Because at the time, back in 2018, it was surprising to me, at least, because there's not a lot of shore access like there was, 20, 30 plus years ago and weren't sure where these people were fishing. So I don't know if there was any insight that they have or you have regarding why a smaller drop for the shore mode trips versus the private boat trips. And I apologize if I missed that earlier in your presentation.
Gonna have to add that as a question to ask the MRIP folks. Thanks. And I'm sure they will listen to this whole presentation, the discussion. And and that may be available in one of the reports. So I'll try to dig it out sooner, but if not, we'll get some follow-up from them.
Rich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jason, really, thank you for the presentation and filling in there. What was the impact of the new survey on the precision on the estimates? Thank you.
I think the precision from that 24 was improved, but they did a lot of extra sampling that I don't think they will be able to maintain budget-wise going forward. My sense is, and I'm trying to recall from the SSC presentation, I mean, it seemed like they may be able to keep precision about the same. There were some improvements in precision, but then we're going to lose some of the sampling. So in terms of 26, there may not be a huge change in precision. Might get a little more precision, for kind of each dollar spent, but they're not going to be able to do as much sampling. So I don't think it had a huge impact on precision. And again, I think there was good precision, but it wasn't quite clear, was that a function of the design or of the sampling intensity and what we're going to expect to see going forward.
Okay, any other questions? Mike, Louise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Jason, for the presentation. It's nice. I had to laugh. It was nice that you found comfort. You were able to speak and jokingly about the project you worked on with the camera out of the Ocean City Inlet. A lot of us were worried about you there for a little while. You weren't the same for a few months, so I'm glad that that's over and you can joke about it. My second question has to do with the anticipated effects of what Chris just brought up with this recalibration on mid-Atlantic species, not only just for the council managed, but for the commission as well. And can you maybe go back over just a quick timeline as to what the anticipated inclusion of the new data for our mid-Atlantic species? I thought I heard you say that it was going to be kind of over a period of time. They're going to be working to recalibrate and fold new information in to assessments, and I understand that. But when the data are recalibrated, before an assessment's done, are we going to see those changes before an assessment?
So I think last time when they did that, there was a period where you could see like both on the MRIP query tool. And so we don't know what our assessment schedule is even going to be for the next 5 years. Like we kind of had a pretty good sense 5 years ago of like what the next 2 or 3 years are going to be. So it's going to depend on that a lot. But so there was this transition team meeting that kind of started to get in, and there are a lot of state staff involved in that. And I think the process will be eventually we'll get the new calibrated estimates. An assessment occurs after that point when they're available. They will use that, and then for monitoring the results of that and the following ABCs and ACLs, they'll use the new stuff. But for ABCs for an assessment, when we haven't had an assessment yet, we're going to have to back calibrate to the old, so it still apples to apples comparison. So there was a bit of a mix, I think, last go around as that new data worked into assessments and ABCs and ACLs. So the kind of the currency stays the same. I anticipate a similar thing will have to occur, and maybe for a much longer period of time, given some of the input we're getting about the likely pace of assessments in coming years.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, that was certainly a painful transition trying to do the accounting. Especially, I remember Julia doing that for CBAS all those times. Any other hands at the table? I'm not seeing any. Since we don't have NOAA staff here, I'm going to hold off on questions from the public when they have an opportunity, and I'm sure there will be other presentations on this. They can ask those questions directly of NOAA staff. So, Jason, anything else for us on these?
Nope, thank you.
Great, thank you. So we're just about back on schedule here, but I would like to take a 10-minute break, or actually we'll go to 3:40. And I wanted to point out for those of you in the room, we have some snacks back here. For those of you at home, I'm sure you know where you keep your snacks. So we'll come back at 3:40. If folks in the room could take their seats, we're going to reconvene here in a minute.
So I told conversation.
All right, seems like we have everyone back around the table. I appreciate that. I'm going to get us started here again. Our next agenda item is mackerel rebuilding in the 2026-2027 specifications framework, including river herring and shad cap. And we're going back to Jason Ditton. Go ahead, Jason, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So I'm going to take a page off last meeting's ILIX playbook of kind of where are we now, how did we get here, and where to next. So first, where are we now? See if I can minimize this. Oops. Okay. Okay. So the current Atlantic mackerel acceptable biological catch is 3,200 metric tons. It was set by the SSC in 2023, and it was designed to facilitate a path toward rebuilding by 2032, a 61% chance of getting there, even if the 2022, I said rebuilding, I meant to say recruitment, was less than the 2023 assessment estimated. So we have the assessment results, and the SSC kind of did something it doesn't usually do with an accepted assessment. It went in and turned a dial on the assessment output within the assessed period. Like, you know, a lot of times we'll be presented with, you know, we use a higher or lower CV, and that impacts the ABCs. With this, there was reason to distrust the terminal year recruitment estimate in not just the projections, but the actual estimated values in the assessment. And so that 3,200 metric tons said, even if we assume that that recruitment wasn't so good, if that pans out that way, the 3,200 metric tons will still get us there. A few of the key uncertainties that were highlighted by the SSC back then, we've had this pattern of initially overestimating recruitment and spawning stock biomass. So we have an assessment of the mackerel stock in 2019. A few years later, when we assess it again, 2019 doesn't look as good as it looked when we looked at it in 2020. So we have that pattern. There's a question of what's driving the bus here, fishing mortality or natural mortality. And also the key index for this assessment is a combined index of the Canadian egg assessment and a US egg information that comes from our May-June Ecomon survey. The Canadian egg assessment index, that is a dedicated survey, and they look at their industry, what they're catching, what the condition of fish is. So they know, they kind of nail the peak spawning period of mackerel for their egg survey. For us, that survey just occurs as it occurs. We know mackerel are spawning around that time, but it's not like we have that direct alignment of that survey occurring on top of peak spawning. So half of our survey is kind of a, we get mackerel eggs in it, we get a trend out of it, but we don't have quite as confidence that it's as well timed as the Canadian survey. So from the 3,200 metric ton ABC, the plan has us deducting expected Canadian catch. 74 metric tons for Canada is what we expected at the time. They've actually increased their landings to around 450 or 500 metric tons the last few years. But at the time, that's what we thought. We deduct expected recreational catch. That's based on a historic number combined with the fact that the council put in a possession limit and then discards, again, some recent historic information. So you subtract those three, the Canada, the recreational catch, and the commercial discards to get to our quota, which is about 1.9 million pounds, or just a little bit below 900 metric tons. So this is a 2025 fishery in blue here. Data reported through September 29th, 2025. The last one we had before the shutdown. So it has closed. You can see the rate was a bit faster than 2024. So this fishery starts with trip limits on the commercial side of 20,000 pounds for limited access permits and 5,000 pounds for open access permits. And then 80%, those are reduced to 10,000 pounds and 2,500 pounds. And then again, that was triggered September 16th, 2025 is in effect for the rest of this year. There's also a 20 fish recreational possession limit. So how do we get here? So I went back to a 1996 assessment just to get a sense of historic landings. And they were a little higher than I thought, and said that from 1804 to 1961, U.S. landings averaged about 24,000 metric tons. In Canada, about 11,000 metric tons from the late 1800s to the mid 1900s. Since 1960, these are the landings. And so like a number of the mackerel squid butterfish species, you have this big ramp up in the 60s and 70s of the foreign fishery that Magnuson essentially came in and shut down. And it's when we think right now, our ABC is 3,200 metric tons, and we had 2 years in a row where they extracted over 400,000 metric tons out of the stock. So the scale is just kind of mind-blowing compared to where we're at right now. And the historic assessments, which use different methods and data, they do appear to have been overly optimistic. If you look at like assessments in the 1990s, the allowable biological catch was specified about 10 times higher what we now think the whole spawning stock biomass was in that year. And we'll talk a little bit more about that change as we go. This is more recent fishery. 1996 and on is generally the best data for Mid-Atlantic and New England commercial fisheries. You can see that kind of robust landings in the early 2000s. And then the fishery essentially collapsed on its own accord, almost no landings in 2011. And even in more recent years, a lot of those landings were not quota constrained. Just in the last couple years, through trip limits and quotas, has landings really been kind of hard constrained. Prices, general uptrend since 2001. A sense of where that mid-2000s fishery occurred. I just went back to an old amendment to kind of get a sense of like where did this fishery mostly occur. You can see, Hudson Canyon, off Long Island, off of Delmarva is where, and again, 2004, 5, 6, we were talking, around 50,000 metric tons roughly, and per year for a few of those years anyway. And this is the darkest squares here was where accounted for most of that landings, a little just backing off by statistical area to get a sense of kind of change over time. And you can see this trend, a bit of a trend towards in the most recent years, more landings occurring off Massachusetts. This is 2020 to 2023, again, just highlighting that, getting a sense of where most landings have been occurring in recent years. So when does a fishery occur? If you just look at like this year and last year, it seems like, it's low early and then ramps up in the summer. But that's kind of not how the primary fishery occurred. So again, I just grabbed a figure from Amendment 11, looking at the kind of red maroon 2002 to 2006. These are those kind of peak domestic production years. And you can see average monthly U.S. commercial landings over those periods. So it was really, January, February, March, April were the active months when there was a big directed fishery, taking in the range of averaging 10 to 14,000 metric tons per month in the years 2002 to 2006. So kind of part two of how we got here. Again, digging back through some historic information, SAW 42, so it was in 2006. Its terminal year was 2004, and it thought the biomass in that year was 2.3 million metric tons. So it's like 5 billion pounds. There was a joint track assessment with Canada in 2010, and there was kind of confusion of what its results were saying. It was clear something looked off, but the models weren't resolving well. 2018, when we started integrating that egg assessment, seems like it's kind of resolved where the confusion was, and its assessment of the spawning stock biomass in 2004, you can see this change. It went from 2.3 million metric tons to 172,000 metric tons. Talking in an order of magnitude, divide by 10, and you're starting to kind of get in the range. So it is, way, way off. And then the stock continued with the current kind of assessment paradigm to decline through 2016. And that benchmark track assessment that concluded it was overfished. So like what was happening, what went wrong in some of those assessments, I think this is a big part of the story. The bottom graph is the spring albatross survey that was used as a major index in the previous assessments. And it's kind of like an overall uptrend and kind of led to a thinking that everything seems to be okay. Seems like what was going on was the albatross had some kind of change in availability of mackerel. So it was catching more mackerel, but there weren't more mackerel. And the egg survey has the opposite trend. And once the new assessment kind of integrated that egg survey, then it resolved into our sense of, why this stock collapsed. Even the new assessment model seems to be over optimistic, not as bad as what we just talked about. But I put this together. I think you've probably seen in some stock assessment presentations, these retrospective things. They look like spider webs, and they kind of talk about how, we keep getting more information. We learn more about a stock, and our perspective on what it was in, 10 years ago changes every 2 years. That same, what was it in 2010? When we look at it in 2012, we get some more information. 2014, we get some more information on the fish that were there in 2010. The fish are getting older. We're seeing them as older age classes. Now, again, not as bad as what we were just talking about from the old models to the new, but we're still seeing some over optimism. And so start up here, our 2018 assessment year. Its terminal year was 2016. So we've got some estimate of recruitment and biomass in 2016. That the 2018, it was published in 2018, 2016, the biomass and recruitment was whatever it was. The next assessment year in 2021, when we look back at what 2016 was like, it says, oh, it wasn't as good as we thought. Recruitment was 15% lower in 2016, and SSB in 2016 was actually 29% lower. Then the next assessment, 23, still focused on what we think the stock was in 2016. Is actually got some more, we see those same fish year after year, right? Those age classes, we see them as they get older. That gives us more information. We look at 23, we say 2016 was even worse. It was 30% from our initial estimate, and SSB was 44% less. 2025 assessment, things seem to have settled out. It didn't change. Our initial 2016 estimate is now still down 30% for recruitment, 44% for SSB. So it took 7 years for that sense of what 2016 was like to finally stabilize. And again, if you look at it here, 2021, our initial 2019 estimates, the next assessment, 2023, our 2019 estimate, the terminal year was rosy, now down 62%. And that stabilized pretty quickly. The 25 was still at 62%. And then our 2023 assessment, its terminal year was 2022. When we looked at 2022 again in 2025, now they're about 20% down for recruitment and 10% for SSB. So we still have this pattern as we get more information about mackerel in any given year in the past, our sense of what that year was like, whether it was the 2016 terminal year, the 2019 terminal year, the 2022 terminal year, we get more information on those year classes as they get older, say, it doesn't look like there was many fish back then. So that's been, again, these patterns are maybe not quite as bad as the tenfold increase, the decrease that we saw from some of those old models, but we still have this issue of we seem to be getting over optimistic initial results of those terminal years in an assessment. This is just aligning that catch, the landings series that we saw a bit earlier. And I think this was actually from the 23 assessment. It seems like what we've been having is, we have a big year class come through. Well, initially there were a lot of mackerel out there, right? And then once that initial biomass was fished down by that foreign fishery, we've had a couple single big year classes that have bumped up the biomass. The fishery is ramped up in response, fished out that year class. And that's kind of happened in a couple subsequent phases. And we can really see in the catches, those age classes move through the fishery. So this is, I think this might have been 81 or 82. There's a huge year class that came through. And, we see them as, age 1 in 1 year, age 2 the next year, age 3 the following. And so in the commercial landings data, we saw these single year classes move through the fishery year after year. And these single year classes fed these big landings periods in the late 80s and early 2000s. They were fed by these 2 year classes moving through. And when we go and sample the ports, look at the sizes of mackerel coming in, we saw those single year classes feeding that fishery until they were gone, and things falling off. And we haven't had, or at least hadn't had, a big year class since that 2000 year class. So again, we're at 3,200 metric ton ABC currently. The SSC, they didn't believe that 2020 the initial 2022 recruitment estimate, because they saw these patterns that they keep getting revised down, and essentially turned a knob and forced to set it to the lower, recent lower median. And that basically evaporated 65% of those fish, that 2022 recruitment year class. And it seems like it probably was not that strong. And maybe with this current assessment, from here, it was only down 23%, but we don't know that it's stabilized, right? We've seen some of these other ones, it's taken, maybe a couple assessments before that actually fully stabilizes. And again, that 3,200 was designed to put us on a rebuilding path, even if that 2022 recruitment isn't as good as the assessment first said it was. So where to next kind of set the scene for some decisions today and upcoming, So there's a advisor AP meeting next week. We'll get an advisory fishery performance report next week. That will feed into the SSC meeting, into the council. I'll say as staff in 2024, I started getting some reports from industry that seemed like there was some higher mackerel abundance. They've also been working with some of the cooperative research folks at the center, try to see if they can identify and quantify mackerel schools acoustically to kind of ground truth things. But the new assessment, kind of hot off the presses, does seem like there's been some better recruitment for a few years, improving the SSB. It's kind of an ongoing pet peeve of mine. This kind of floating axis that the center uses on these kind of makes things, I think, look a little better than they are. If I draw in actually where the real zero is there, you can see, the biomass in the 20 teens was like almost down, without the zero actually drawn in, it looks a little rosier than it actually is. But anyway, it seems like we've had an increase. And why have we had an increase? This is a table from the assessment that was just posted before the shutdown, and the 2020 recruitment is not as good as we thought it was last time we looked at it, but it's still not terrible. 2023 improved, and it's seeing like a huge recruitment event in 2024. These would be eggs in 2023 and age 1 fish in 24. And that's kind of like driving the bus on why we have potentially some very different set of projections that the council will look at in the future. But we know that historically with this assessment, that terminal year recruitment, let's see, that'd be thousands, so it's like 1.3 billion fish, age 1 fish that the recruitment, that the assessment thinks were, hatched in 23, age 1s in 24. All the projections going forward, they think there's this huge biomass of age 1 fish that are going to be age 2s, age 3s, age 4s. It's a bit early to know if that number is going to stick or not. If it's like the last few, it's probably going to come down by some amount. We won't know how much until we get a few iterations down the road. Again, that initial 2016 recruitment ended up coming down by 30%. The initial 2019 recruitment ended up coming down by 62%. Again, the initial 2022 recruitment didn't come down by that much, but we don't know that that's actually stabilized yet. So, trying to set up for council action in December, staff suggested a potential range of ABCs, trying to essentially handicap what the SSC might do to that recruitment estimate. And if you just took the assessment's estimate of that recruitment, that 2024 recruitment, basically the stock is already rebuilt in 2025. And it was, it was like a 50-some% in 24, in 25, it may either 25 or 26, it would already be rebuilt. And so then, essentially on paper, you could return to the council's traditional P-star method and you'd be around, 48,000 metric tons. I'm pretty sure that the SSC is going to impose some kind of penalty on that recruitment because there's nothing that's occurred to suggest that we're not going to see that again. In the projections, so we're in a bit of a triage situation right before the shutdown. Kirsten was trying to get this. Kirsten Curdy is the lead assessment scientist. She's trying to get the assessment posted and a few projection scenarios out for the SSC because we didn't know if she'd be available come October 23rd. So there were two penalties that seemed reasonable to her and folks at the center to work as a sensitivity analysis. One is B, that 30%. Where does that come from? That comes from, okay, our initial 2016 recruitment estimate. We now think that was actually 30% lower than it first was. So that's one. That's B here, that minus 30%. And then C, if you recall, the SSC, when it replaced the last recruitment estimate, what did it replace it with? It said, we think recent low recruitment is a reasonable replacement. And that, again, that got rid of 65% of those 2022 fish. We've had a few years of decent recruitment, and the center's sensitivity analysis was don't replace the 24 recruitment with the recent very low recruitment median, just use the whole time series median that the whole assessment is based on and our targets are based on for rebuilding. So that, again, if the SSC's approach last year would probably knock out like 95%, and I don't have the number, but it's around like, maybe 95% of those fish would just be knocked out. If you just set it at the recent fairly low recruitment. If you set it at the time series median from 1975 to current, it still takes out 86% of those 2024 age ones. So those are the three sensitivities that the center ran for what to do with that 2024 gangbusters recruitment estimate of 1.3 billion age ones. And we don't know what the SSC is going to do with that. And, odds are decent it's going to be in this range somewhere, but won't know for sure until they look at it, look at the assessment. There's pages and pages of diagnostics. Does a survey fit well? Does a catch at age landings fit well? So they're going to look at all those diagnostics and make a determination about what, if any, penalty to impose. And you can see that it has huge impacts on the ABCs. If that recruitment actually occurred as estimated, the council standard risk policy would bump you up to a 48,000 metric ton ABC. I don't think that's super likely. I think there's going to be some penalty that the SSC decides is appropriate. And so probably A, B, or C might get eliminated, and you're probably going to be left with one of those after the SSC, or something else, maybe in this range, maybe maybe higher than 86%. I don't know. They're going to make that evaluation on October 23rd. So so staff recommends endorsing that range of rebuilding approaches for further development. We'll take what the SSC gives us and kind of build it out accordingly. Some of those options are probably not going to be viable once the SSC says, put this penalty on that big recruitment event. And then staff also requests an endorsement of, exploring whatever modifications to trip, because right now there's almost the primary historic directed fishery, cannot occur. Those vessels were landing, several hundred thousand pounds per trip. So that historic directed fishery is not occurring at the current trip limits. So depending on what the SSC gives for ABCs, staff will fill out what looking back historically, what were the regulations on the directed permits, the incidental permits, and build out a range of options to change trip limits, change closure thresholds, potentially the recreational possession limit, the river herring and shad cap. And then the service also identified some recreational accountability measures that are no longer, they don't make sense given how the specifications are handled. They weren't cleaned up in a previous action, so they've suggested the council clean those up a bit. We'll work with Garfo staff. Hopefully they're back soon to clean that regulatory text up. So one of those things is the river herring and shad cap. The current cap is 129 metric tons. It is the amount of river herring and shad if the ratio of the cap to all catch on mackerel trips was about about 0.5%. So the ratio of the river herring and shad to all catch on mackerel trips, because they don't just catch mackerel, it's often like mackerel and herring mixed. So basically at a quota and a ratio the council had previously set in the past for a quota of 17,371 metric tons, that was a river herring and shad cap. When we came in and essentially stopped the directed fishery, we just kind of left that cap in place. It hasn't been being utilized because there's no directed fishery occurring. So staff would, again, if depending on what the SSC provides, if the quotas are higher than 17,371 metric tons, just maintain what the council set previously as that scalar. And the council previously scaled that number up and down when the mackerel quotas were larger. That's, again, so there's a good bit of uncertainty because we don't know what the SSC is going to do. I think the ABCs are going to be somewhere in that range of the current 3,200 metric tons to maybe substantially larger. One aside on recreational catch, I mentioned this at the last council meeting. It looked like potentially 2024 mackerel may have been over its ACL. But Garfo staff, they saw some odd main catches. And then we went and traced those to a few interviews in Eastport, Maine that reported just I don't remember if it was 100 mackerel or more, both retained and released. So it shot these mackerel landings in Maine up sky high. So MRIP staff, they went and looked at the interviews, and they look legit. There's nothing, I think those landings actually occurred, but MRIP staff have a way to if you get these single peculiar, really high landings, they can adjust the weighting on them to kind of dampen the effect to all of Maine. So they did that, and that helped us avoid an ACL overage. But it was kind of a curious fact that I thought you all would like is, so that same, it was in 1 month, it was in the summer of 24. So I started Googling Maine mackerel landings 24, whenever it was July or August. And what did you know, I found a YouTube video pasted. This is the exact same location where the interviews occurred in the same month. And So I think I found, whoops, hold on, go back to muting. So I think I found the culprits of the Sky High Eastport, Maine, summer 2024 mackerel MRIP intercepts. Again, Garfo staff saw this, it looked odd, worked with MRIP staff, and the end result was a more normal Maine, how do I now get a more normal 2024 Maine Atlantic mackerel MRIP estimates. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. Looks like we had location and number of hooks, but we're still going to need soak time on that if you could. So I'd appreciate it. All right, so let's and Jason here has laid out what staff is looking for, what he's looking for, but let's start out amongst the council members with questions for Jason. All right, Jason, we're lucky there, not seeing any questions. So if you don't mind moving back to, I guess, the slide, I guess, that had mentioned what options you're, or I guess the fact that we could move this, there we go, staff recommends. Right, okay. So as Jason mentioned, there's going to still be more to come as the SSC works on this, but he has a recommendation here of endorsing what was presented. So I'll look to the council on this here. Will of the council on staff's recommendation, is there any, if not any comments, any concerns on moving forward with what has been presented? Okay, not seeing any. So Jason, I think you have Mike Pentney.
Well, not a concern, just I want to flag some process things. And Jason, I don't know if you were going to talk about sort of some potential process options for the mackerel specs. Were you planning to or no?
So we're currently scheduled to take final action in December. And with a normal implementation, one might expect, for those to become final, say, well, we originally were supposed to get this assessment in July for action in August. The egg data wasn't available. The assessment can't roll without the egg data. The egg data just came to the center maybe a month ago. That's why the assessment was delayed. It couldn't be completed until they had that egg data in hand. So, with December final action, maybe April, May might be a typical implementation deadline. We have rollover for specifications in mackerel. So we'd start the year off at 3,200 metric tons. That quota, the trip limits, 20,000 pounds for limited access, 10,000 for incidental. That would be the typical process. Was there some other process?
Yeah, I guess the concern would be, and I appreciate hearing from, the industry, is if we're looking at a more optimistic outcome from the assessment, and we may see, depending on the SSC's discussions later this month, as you pointed out, potentially substantial increases from status quo and in terms of what the quota would be for 2026. If we're looking at the normal process where council takes final action in December, and as you say, we're looking at, then getting specs in place April, May. And you pointed this out that in past years when the fishery was strong, there was a lot of effort in the early months, January, February, March, April. So I think there's a risk that we miss that opportunity. We've also heard that ICES is recommending a 70% cut in North Atlantic mackerel. So, there might be some market implications for our industry there. So, you know, there's a couple of process things we could talk about. One would be, you know, there is a provision of the mackerel regs that allow for the Mid-Atlantic Council, when it's taking action over the course of 2 meetings, which it's doing now because we're talking about the mackerel action at this meeting and we'll take final action in December. The council can recommend that we implement the specifications as direct to final rule. But if the council wants to do that, there are some additional provisions and things that the council should address. And there's some specific factors that the council should look at and address if it wants to recommend that we go straight to final. That might save a couple of months if we can get the specs out, you know, in January, maybe getting them in place by February. Of course, we could also consider an in-season action, which doesn't require the council to do much, except we would use December as the consult with the council opportunity for an in-season action to set the 2026 quota closer to what we would expect the final rule would be. So I just wanted to flag those 2 opportunities. There's also, you know, there could be a request for an emergency action, but I'm not sure that would buy us any time over just going straight to final. But I just wanted to flag those issues because I think if there is some, you know, desire to get these specifications implemented as soon as possible in 2026, the council should be thinking about that and maybe taking some steps between now and December to kind of set the stage for a more abbreviated rulemaking process.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. So I guess I'll look around the room then. Or back to you also, Mike. Is there a preference between the 2 courses presented, or does that all kind of play into, you know, the comments you're kind of hoping to hear?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably depends on a few different things. I think one would be kind of what numbers are we getting back from the SSC at the end of October, and what are the implications of those, you know, whatever the ABC might be. So I think we kind of need to wait and see. Also, how complicated is the action? If we're looking at bag limit changes, or we're looking at mesh size changes, or we're looking at, you know, more complicated actions, going straight to a final rule for the entire package is a little bit more complicated, especially where we've been with rulemaking recently. It's been very challenging to get things out in a timely way. So an in-season action that just addresses the quota might be the most efficient way, and then we can deal with everything else through the normal process. But I just wanted to flag that these are the things that we're thinking about, and when my staff are back, they'll be talking with Jason and trying to put a game plan together, particularly once we know what the SSC recommendation is going to be. But I wanted to flag it for the entire council, so if we come to you in December with some suggestions or some options, it won't be the first time you're hearing it.
Bobby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Petney, for bringing that to our attention. Especially in the Mid-Atlantic, the utilization of this fishery is in the first quarter of the year. So, you know, if we can't get final rule out till April or May, then we're going to be a year behind on it. I would love to find out, you know, what's going to be the cleanest and easiest. I don't think we can do it as simple as something as a in-season adjustment on overall quota if we have a trip limit in effect, because the trip limit is the mitigating issue here. That's really what's hampering this fishery. You know, you can't make, if you're bound to 20,000 a trip, and the trip is, you know, a 24-hour period or one event, we can't go faster. So, you know, I think that's something that we definitely need to keep in mind. I am glad to see that we're making steps in a positive direction with this fishery, and also kind of not doing like we've done in the past where we swing for the fences. You know, I'm really, I actually, it's going to sound weird, but I like the approach of the 86%. It's an increase. It's something that gives industry something to be able to kind of, now we can do something with the fish. It gives us enough to actually create a direct fishery again, but not enough that if in 2 years the math comes out and we were wrong again, we're not shooting ourselves in the feet. So, no, I can completely agree and support with that. I just, you know, I really would like to, and I guess a lot of this hinges on what the SSC comes out with. I mean, we're putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. But knowing what hurdles we may or may not have to kind of circumvent or overcome beforehand could save us a lot of time. Thank you.
Any other hands around the table? Sorry. Okay. Okay. I'll look to members of the public for comment. Peter Hughes.
Good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to say what I said up in Maine a couple of weeks ago. This is weird. I'm with Atlantic Cape Fisheries in Cape May, New Jersey. And one of the things that I will say is I read that same article about the potential 70% reduction in the European mackerel harvest. If that happens, or if anything even close to that happens, there's going to be a huge void in the mackerel supplies on a worldwide basis. And all that's going to do is economically benefit U.S. fishermen. So keeping that in the back of your minds, if there's any way that this can be sped up, it would be greatly appreciated to provide those vessels that opportunity, because it doesn't come real often. And it's unfortunately at the hardship of others. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got two more hands, so I'll go to Megan Lapp in the room. Well, actually, and then Greg D and Jeff Kalen. I'll go to you after those two hands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Megan Lapp, Seafreeze Limited. Very much support moving this forward as quickly as possible, potentially, you know, with that in-season adjustment. Our vessels are working hard with the Cooperative Research Branch of the Northeast Fisheries Science Center to actually do mackerel science. We have some of the sounders on our vessel collecting, multiple vessels, collecting the acoustic data, feeding it back to the center. And there are large bodies of mackerel out there. And they're actually not small mackerel, which is interesting. And so providing an opportunity to take advantage of that stock, you know, while it is available in our region would be really, really huge. And I know my sales guys are always asking me, like, what's happening with mackerel? What's happening with mackerel? Because they're trying to create a business plan for the next year. So moving this quickly would actually be very, very helpful to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Mr. Chairman, mostly questions for the RA if possible. Mike, are you, just so I can clarify, you're thinking that a in-season adjustment would be easier and quicker than some sort of pre-approval of the specs? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a framework adjustment. So, you know, Jason highlighted there's a number of actions that could be included in that. And so the more actions that are included in the framework adjustment, the more complicated the rulemaking is. If we're going to try to go straight to final rule, the regs certainly provide that avenue, that pathway, but it's not something that we've done in probably 20 years. And so getting our attorneys, all the attorneys up the entire chain of attorneys to agree could be a bit of take some work. I think we probably would have an easier time with doing an in-season adjustment, you know, particularly in this environment, to say, hey, we're doing an in-season adjustment under this authority to increase the quota and make sure we address the possession limit issue in order to provide that opportunity for our fishermen while we do full rulemaking on the full specs package and framework adjustment. again, as you know, I'm sitting here by myself without any legal advice or staff advice. But I think that may be the most efficient way forward.
And, oh, go, Jason, please.
And again, not having the benefit of GC, but the in-season adjustment language in the regs says the specifications established pursuant to this section may be adjusted, blah, blah, blah. There's a long list of things that are included in the annual specifications measures, including the trip limits. So I don't know that that in-season adjustment measure would necessarily be limited to just a quota. It seems like any of these measures would be applicable also based on my initial read here. So that we'd have to investigate that just to see what exactly could be adjusted.
And lastly, Mike, are you also considering that we can waive some of the comment period and things like that to 15 days or, shave a couple of weeks off here and there? Thank you.
Yeah, and when the in-season adjustment is it's just a notice action that we publish and then it's effective. It's the rulemaking process where we would, that's to get us closer to April or March, we would have to shave some time off the comment period if we're going full proposed and final rulemaking. But as I'll just point out, we're still waiting to publish the 2025 herring specs that the New England Council took action on in April, and we published a proposed rule in July. So going proposed and final is not something I would really hang my hat on right now.
All right, thanks, Greg. I have a couple hands online. I'm going to go to Jeff Kalen first.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your first council meeting as chair, Joe. Yeah, I don't really have much more to add except to support what we just heard from Peter and Megan and Greg and Atlantic. I'm Jeff Kalen with Lund's Fisheries for those who don't know me, and both Lund's and Atlantic Capes are members of the Science Center for Marine Fisheries, which we've talked about over the years. I think we're in our 11th year. And over the last calendar year, May Sato from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute has been working on a project that we funded on acoustics calibration to refine the estimates of the fish that are out there. It's kind of gone in fits and starts, but we're heavily invested in allowing the use of our boats, and we have scientific grade equipment on now that we didn't have 10, 15 years ago. So we're encouraged with what we've seen today. And Jason, I really appreciate your going back and doing a historical analysis because, boy, there's been some ups and downs over the years. Some of us remember, I certainly do, when we had a 300,000 metric ton mackerel quota. And at the same time, we had a 200,000 metric ton herring quota. And that was when the Atlantic Star wanted to come in, and we stopped that factory trawler from coming in on the West Coast and so forth. So that history that you put together was really helpful, and it really helped me understand kind of how we got here. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to say also to Mr. Penny that I really appreciate the initiative that you're taking with your suggestions on mackerel today, Mike, and also on Ilex that was talked about earlier today and that you and I had a chance to talk about last week. And I think that it's great to see that initiative coming and your perception of exactly the fact that we need to go fishing in the wintertime, and there's a real opportunity this winter with the northeastern mackerel stocks kind of being on the rope as they are. So I just want to say thank you, and we'll all look forward to the SSC meeting, but I'm in support of what's being discussed today and appreciate the council's support for the roadmap that is becoming available to us here. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And I've got two more hands online, and then I'll come back to the council. So next up is Maria Abate.
Hi,
This is Maria Abate with the Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead Aquina on Martha's Vineyard. This comment is based on information in the Northwest Atlantic Mackerel 2025 Management Track Assessment Report dated September 29th, 2025, and Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council Memoranda dated September 24th and October 2nd, 2025. River herring are a significant sustenance and cultural resource of the Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead Aquina. Despite years of conservation and monitoring, this tribal herring run now is at less than 1% of its historic abundance. Based on peer-reviewed genomic information, it is known that southern New England herring runs are substantially impacted by offshore commercial trawling during their migrations. Maintaining or increasing river herring and shad bycatch quotas in Atlantic mackerel fishery is bad policy and ultimately impedes the goal of restoring, one, American seafood competitiveness by depleting these forage fish populations at the base of the predator fish food chains, and two, would impair Herring Amendment 10's purpose of river herring shad catch reduction measures for their coastwide restoration. The Council's reasoning to keep the river herring shad quota at 129 metric tons so the mackerel fishery can remain open long enough for sufficient observer trips contradicts the primary purpose of having quotas and observers in the first place, to manage fish populations for long-term fishery profitability. Furthermore, scaling river herring shad quota up to a higher mackerel quota that is undermined by scientific uncertainty reduces the chance of the mackerel stock rebuild by 2030, which will limit attaining competitive sustainable fisheries and threatens the persistence of the herring resource of the federally recognized Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead Aquina. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Yes, thank you. I have one other hand, and that's Kevin Job. Go ahead, Kevin.
Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you sound good.
Fantastic, thank you. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, council members, and staff for the background info and the opportunity to comment today. My name is Kevin Job. I'm the river herring biologist for the state of Connecticut, Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. I'm here today to talk briefly on our concerns regarding an increase to the current river herring and shad catch cap in the Atlantic mackerel fishery. Since the mid-1990s, our river herring populations, comprised of blueback herring and alewife, have been collapsing across Connecticut and southern New England as a whole. This collapse in Connecticut has occurred despite over 50 fishway construction projects, dozens of dam removals, the reintroduction of over 156,000 pre-spawn adult alewives across the state, and a full moratorium on any take of either species in Connecticut since 2002. More specifically, our blueback herring runs are currently below 1% of where they were in the 1980s, with the Connecticut River run, which was 632,000 herring in 1985, currently at 144 individual fish in 2025. Similarly, our alewife runs are about 5% of target goals, with many rivers falling below that number. So we began here tracking the river herring and shad bycatch landings in the Atlantic mackerel fishery following the 2018 and 2019 overages and the subsequent mackerel fishery closures, and the 2020 catch cap quota increase to 129 metric tons. We also started with the recent Reed et al. Paper, which highlights the spatial and temporal genetic stock composition of the river herring bycatch in southern New England, Atlantic herring, and Atlantic mackerel fisheries. During the last few years, we have also watched as the Atlantic mackerel fishery effort around southern New England was greatly reduced by decreased mackerel quotas, during which time our river herring numbers began to start rebuilding again. In 2025, our blueback herring run was the best it has been since 1997, and we set record returns at 3 long-term alewife monitoring locations. Though this was a welcome step in the right direction, this year's combined runs only equated to 414,000 river herring statewide, which is only 4% of our current target estimate of just over 11 million river herring across our monitored runs in Connecticut. Additionally, the current catch cap of 129 metric tons allows for the harvest of roughly 1.3 million river herring a year from areas and times found to be genetically dominated by southern New England river herring bycatch. This catch cap is also not biologically based, instead being created using historic river herring and shad bycatch landings that occurred during a time when river herring numbers were already collapsing. indicating that these caps are not adequate to protect southern New England river herring stocks from collapse. Here in Connecticut, we have invested tens of millions in state and federal dollars to restore river herring runs with the purpose of providing ecological, economic, and social benefits to our stakeholders. Increasing the current catch cap above 129 metric tons, which is already allowing the harvest of 3 to 7 times the river herring documented annually statewide, would continue to curtail our efforts to restore river herring in Connecticut while disincentivizing industry to avoid bycatch hotspots. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your comments. Okay, with that, I'm going to come back to the council. And I think, Jason, before we got to this round of comments, which are much appreciated by both council and public, I wanted to ask you, were you in a place where you had the guidance you needed to keep moving us forward?
I think so, but I think it would be useful just to kind of have another clear check-in around the table. I think the staff proposal is what it is. So yeah, I mean, if the council wants to move forward with that, can indicate, I think it'd be good just to clarify that. And I think that's it.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And I guess we kind of dove into discussions as I was more or less just approaching the question. And I also wanted to echo Jeff Kalin's comments and appreciate all the background here for, especially at the assessment level, which has become somewhat of an oddity for us. But having that background for all of us is some of us a reminder and some of us new information. And the idea that we're going to need to keep moving forward quickly, especially coming up to our next and our last meeting for the year. So what we have as staff's recommendation, are there any concerns with what's on the board? If not, I think Jason has what he needs. Not seeing any, Jason. So good. Okay. Yep. All right. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, just related, I'll just flag that one of the council's RA projects is kind of revising and redoing a previous river herring avoidance modeling effort. That work is underway. We have contractor Janet Nye at UNC is working, and we hope to have for the start of the year essentially modeled with temperature kind of a river herring kind of hotspot bycatch avoidance app or map as again kind of an advisory type thing for industry to consider as they're fishing. So it's one of the two early preliminary IRA projects, and we will have some results of that at the end of this year or early next year.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Appreciate it. A couple of comments. So I'm going to go to Bobby Rule and then Mike Pentney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, mainly just a question. I mean, do we need a motion to keep this going forward, or is it we pretty much set with the guidelines already? Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're good. And then we had a comment or question from Mike Pentney.
Just thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up with Jason, because one of the things that the agenda says we're adopting a range of alternatives for the framework, and one thing I'm unclear on is I think there was a mention of a mesh size, minimum mesh size. Is that still on the table for the framework adjustment from your perspective?
Just want to quickly review the So the language in the memo was just requesting for endorsing exploration of any modifications to trip/possession limits or other management measures that are appropriate given the FMP and goals of rebuilding the stock and are achieving optimum yield. I mean, there has been discussion in the past by some components of the fishery that they might be interested in some kind of minimum mesh. But there isn't any specific literature. And I think the idea is that we have, small mackerel out there. Could a minimum mesh, be useful in this fishery? But we don't have like specific studies on that. So, at this time, I think if the council wanted staff to explore that, there's probably, studies on similar species that could be explored to, explored if the council or public was interested in that. But, it's not a core current trip/possession limit. So unless staff was directed to do so, that's kind of not in the current specifications.
Follow up, Mike?
Yeah, thanks for that. I just had a note from staff that was something that you had a brief conversation with. So I just wanted to follow up on that because the one point that I was going to make was if there was going to be some consideration of implementing a minimum mesh and was going to be some analysis, particularly around this, this new year class that looks to be quite strong based on the data that you showed, that typically for introducing a minimum mesh size, we would expect that to delay implementation of that for probably a year. And that might affect the analysis in terms of if it's going to serve to protect this new year class or not, if it's going to be delayed for a year. So just wanted to flag that before, if you were going down the road to do some analysis to incorporate that delay.
Yeah, again, it's it could be something that comes up during the advisory panel report. If participants are interested in pursuing that. Again, it's not a current core management measure. So as things stand now, unless there's some, whether it's, again, it could come up at the AP meeting, but it's not a core current management measure to adjust. But yeah, I had mentioned it to Garfo staff as, there was some, there have been some discussion, in the past in industry about that topic, but again, we'll kind of see what comes up at the AP meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both, actually. So with that, Jason, I think we're good now. Great. And we have one more agenda item that's set for 5 p.m. And we'll take just about that amount of time. We're going to move stuff around here. It's acknowledgement of outgoing council member. We have Peter Hughes with us who termed out this summer.
Good to see you walk back.
So we'll give us a few minutes. We'll come back at 5, set up, and we'll do that. Thank you. Okay, if folks could take their seats, please. All right, everyone, I'm going to get started on our last agenda item. Have gavel will travel. I didn't know I had to carry it around with me. Well, thank you, everyone. As I mentioned, we are going to take this time to recognize Peter Hughes, who has served 9 years with the council and has recently termed off. I was lucky enough to serve most of that time with Peter. Peter was appointed in 2016. I came in 2018. And like many new council members, he was one of the people I leaned on heavily to help me get my feet under me. So Peter, I'm very happy to be the one doing this here in Philly, because one of Peter's greatest contributions for those of you that don't know, is Peter's a foodie that's happy to share recommendations on great places to eat. So being in Philly is certainly helpful there, and not Galloway, no offense to my hometown. Yeah, okay. So on to Peter. So Peter was appointed to the council in 2016. As I mentioned, he served his maximum of 3 consecutive 3-year terms. During that time, he served as chair of the Mackerel Squid Butterfish Committee for 8 years and chair of the Surf Clam and Ocean Quahog Committee for 5 years. In these roles, he guided the council through some very challenging issues, and several of you have lived through that with us, including mackerel rebuilding, the chub mackerel management, surf clam and ocean quahog species separation, and the excessive shares issue, just to name a few. Peter was also liaison to the New England Council throughout his time serving with us, and also served on several New England committees. He ensured that our decisions and concerns were certainly communicated to the New England Council, and the councils, as I've heard around the table many times, all operate very differently. So the role of liaison becomes important in many ways. I always appreciated Peter's skills at not only bringing forward the management actions that were taken at the New England Council, but putting them in a frame, a context that is relevant to what the MID was working on, and from our action plans to our concerns. And I've always appreciated that about Peter's liaison role. He was also always willing, to not only listen, but he was paying attention to public comments. That was always clear. I think Peter always came to the table with the idea that you're looking for the best possible resource situation for all of those included. Peter came in as an industry rep and served on that role for New Jersey. New Jersey is also obviously one of the big recreational fishing pressures, so to speak, of both the council and for the entire Atlantic coast. And Peter always did his best to reach out to staff at the DEP and just make sure that he's doing his best in representing both sides. So the council benefited greatly from Peter's role in all of those aspects, and I think a big part of that was just what Peter brought to the table from his many roles with Atlantic Capes. And so with that, Peter, I'd like to have you come up, please, and we're going to give you a round of applause, and we have something else here for you as well. have a seat, and I'll read that out after. Why don't you make a few comments, and then I could even read that out for you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. It's been an honor and a privilege to sit around this table and work with everybody around the table. We might not have always agreed, but we came to what I believe were the right decisions. Some of them were very hard, some of them were very simple. It was also my honor and privilege to represent those who don't have a seat at the table and provide a voice for them. Because, you know, our fish is in Middle America. It goes out to the West Coast, it goes around the world. We have an opportunity today in regards to, you know, possible mackerel shortages around the world to increase our quota to benefit U.S. fishermen. I'm sorry, I'm going to miss that at the table because that's one of those where the trajectory went up. A lot of these things that we look at, the trajectory is going down, and they're very difficult decisions that have to be made. But that being said, I appreciate the work that this body does, and I understand that it has to be a collaborative process with a lot of voices. And that's ASFMC, that's the New England Council, that's members of the general public. And this council is very transparent in that way. All of them are very transparent in that way, allowing people to participate. So again, thank you very much. Thank you for this lovely parting gift. You know, I know some people around the table have one or two parting gifts who have been on the council a number of times. Lori, I'm not looking at you, but and others. But thanks. It's been a quick 9 years. So that's that. Dinner tonight, I'm going to Hot Pot. There are a lot of, Chinatown has a great, wonderful experience at Philadelphia. That happens to be where I would go if you want to go with a group of people. You can typically get in a restaurant without a reservation. There's a great Italian restaurant, not too far, it's all walking distance, Giuseppe and Sons, which is an awesome, awesome experience. It's a true Philadelphia experience. You're almost in the cellar, but it's a really cool dining experience. So that being said, thank you very much. And you're not gonna get rid of me. I'm gonna be around still.
Well, thank you again, Peter. And for those of you who haven't had your food served by conveyor belt, I also highly recommend some hot pot tonight. Okay. So with that, we're going to wrap up day one of our October meeting. Thank you to everybody. And thank you to staff for getting us through this so efficiently. Okay. Yeah. And Chris, any announcements? Sorry.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Hospitality is in room 227. So that's on the second floor. If you're not staying at the hotel and you don't have a card, you're not going to be able to get into the elevator, or you can get into the elevator, but you're not going to be able to get up. So make sure you have someone with you that does have the card. Again, it's room 227. So everyone's invited. We'll see you there.